Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So today we are gonna see what if Naruto was obsessed with lame Erza. Scarlet Cry. Last of the Sharingan by Beyond My Mask. He crawled, a sadistic grin embedded on his face. He was hurting, but it felt so good. Blood dripped down onto the cold rugged ground. Ashore, he could tell, he was on a shore. The cold waves of water dashed against his feet. His appearance was ragged and his right hand was drenched in the blood of his enemy. Danzo, greet my brother in the next world. But Danzo had struck the final blow. The reverse tetragram seal, it had caught him in the blast, sending him to oblivion along with the eyes of his brother, hidden in his cloak. His blade lay across him, sheathed, his ninja tools to his side. His hair was mangled and his blood mixed with the cold waves of water that hit his body. The last Chidori had sucked up the last of his chakra. His gaze slowly turned upwards. A tower of magnificent sight stood before him, surrounded by the ocean on all sides. With one last glance to the black tower that stood before him, his eyelids closed and his face buried itself into the sand, exhausted and without chakra. Huh? Hey, look over here, looks like we got a strangler. Footsteps hit the sand, their prints firmly sealed on the shore. 3 to 4 men, dressed in a purple guard uniform, a hood over their head. They kicked his body, one nudged it with his foot. The other poked the backside of his spear onto his body, questioning his companions. Is he alive? Doesn't matter, in this place. All of them are dead anyway, you got that right. Looks like he was packing some weapons. Confiscate everything and keep them in the cell block door. Pick him up. We can use another extra slave. Lord Zaref's awakening can be sped up with even one of them. They picked up the fallen individual and dragged him across the shore and into the tower. His eyes were heavy, and he could not open them. The sound of a creaking rusted door tore through the tower and then his body was tossed inside the chamber. You sure it's all right? Keeping him in here with that girl? Hey, they're both bleeding, aren't they? I'd say they belong together, just look at that. You're right, both their eyes are bleeding. Hey, whatever, let's get back there, I want to check out the blade. And they left. 2 individuals lay in the chamber, one a 16-year-old boy. Another a 11-year-old child. Scarlet hair adorned the girl and black raven hair adorned the boys. Their blood flowed down onto the cold floor below them. Mixing into one, it flowed out of the chamber and into a crevice, a small opening outside their chamber. Out of the 2, the girl panted hard in weariness and pain. Her small short breaths hit the face of the Avenger. He could feel it and his eyelids slowly opened. Blurriness, as it cleared. The sight before him was not one could stomach but had seen worse. What is this? Is this her blood? Without warning, he dragged his right arm to the girl's face and brushed her red hair aside. Her blood attached itself to his hand, as if flowing onto it. His mind screamed in anger and then his arm twitched as the girl regained consciousness. Her lone eye's gaze fell onto him. His gaze fell and he drew short breaths. She smiled and his breath hitched. See, can you help me? Ni-san, my eye, it hurts. His heart bled, as promised, the new story. Hopefully I don't screw up the plot like I did with the one who will inherit my will. Hope I did okay. This was just a short prologue. Anyway, until next time. If anyone wants the cover pic, they can check it out on my DeviantArt ACC. The link's in my profile. Liar disclaimer. I in no shape or form own the characters or settings of Naruto or Fairy Tail. To Lightning Blade 49. Thank you. Hope you continue to read. Laughing face. To Alien VX0. Will do that. Thank you for the tip. I'm actually aiming for his personality to evolve into how he was before the time skip and a little before the massacre. He was really joyful when he was 8 years old. Thank you for the review. To Adrian 12. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the story. Laughing face. To Crimson 11116. Actually, I had already done a sequel to Revenge to Redemption. Sasuke had appeared in the FF13 world. But I decided to delete it and make it afresh later. As soon as I'm done with Devils and Valkyries 13-2, I will head back to Revenge to Redemption, so keep an eye out for it. To Tsunashi 777. Will do. Thank you so much for the review. Laughing face. To Mars 09. I hope you do. I hope you enjoy the story. Laughing face. To Kingreader. Sasuke's personality won't allow me to do that. He's whack in the head right now. Until I actually have him build a relationship with Erza. There's no chance that will happen anytime soon, or I'm going to stretch the introductory arc before I head into canon. A lot of things need to be established after all. To Naparatari. I suppose not, it's supposed to be a little darker than Itachi's. There's a lot of emotional trauma involved, so if you don't enjoy the story, you are welcome not to read it anymore. There are plenty of other stories within this crossover that are brilliantly written. Laughing face, so thank you for the review. To 4 Sweet. Liana. Ahaha cheeky smiley face, I learnt that from the one who will inherit my will, lol. I really screwed up bad. That's why I wrote another story called Devils and Valkyries to understand how to meld a plot together. You won't be disappointed with this one _. To Apocalypse Legionnaire 117. Haha, thank you. Hope you continue to read, laughing face. To Kana. Ha ha ha, you'll just have to wait till we reach the Daedalus arc. Thanks for the review. Hope you continue to read. Laughing face to Chins 4TW. Glad you liked it. The chapter is short cause it was just a small prologue that I wanted to get out. To check how PPL would react to it. To Revan 228. Haha. Long time man. Laughing face, good to see you on this story too. Laughing face, Sasuke's personality is really unstable at the moment. It's going to deteriorate a lot more before it gets better. That's where Erza comes in. Laughing face. To Mooseman 3. Aha, sorry for the short chapter. I just wanted to see how everyone would react to the new story. To Holy Knight 5. Haha. How could I forget you? Your tips and suggestions always helped me stay on point and allowed me to think about new plot ideas. I hope your suggestions don't die down this time. Laughing face, I'm looking forward to reading them. _. At this point, I don't think even Sasuke would want to give his own eyes to Erza. He's really unsable at the moment. And that's why I plan on building a relationship before addressing any of the Sharingan concerns. To Lost T Rider 2. Thank you. Hope you continue to read, _. To Night Stallion. I actually didn't ditch my last story. I was planning on continuing it, but I realized I would just be adding Itachi into canon chapters. It'd be a bore, and his character has already been developed to a fine point, so I decided to go back to my original plot. It was always Sasuke and Erza. I just changed it to Itachi since I had made Sasuke's character a copy of his older brother's. I will update it when I have the time. Many people know my updating speed. I take off every once in a while every month, but I never abandon the stories that I have a thirst to complete. To Wixland Lone Star. Thank you. I didn't go in depth to how he ended up in Earthland. I will later when he realizes he isn't in his own world anymore, but the basic gist of it is that Sasuke got caught in Danzo's reverse tetragram seal. Their relationship will be a sibling one. Haha. Thank you. But it might be a little more darker than my previous story. Other than that, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. _. To Jason Mosby. Really? Wow, thank you. Laughing face, I'm glad you enjoyed my stories. When I look back, Revenge to Redemption was so long ago. I'm really grateful for your review. Appreciate it. I hope you continue to read the story. Chapter 1. False liar, he groaned. His whole body ached, from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. He couldn't move, and when he tried desperately, it hurt even more. The pain was overwhelming, yet he found some sick satisfaction in it. But that satisfaction sunk when his gaze rested on the girl lying next to him. Equally weary but greatly bloodied. And through it all, she managed to smile at him. His mind rattled and confused. What kind of person would smile when someone would torture them? Her lips drew into a thin line, and Sasuke knew the girl would bleed more than she already had. Pity. How long had it been since he had experienced it, but now he was showing it. Her lone eye closed and her short breaths decreased slowly but steadily. He moved both his arms to his sides and tried with his might to push himself up, only to fall back down onto the puddle of his and the scarlet-haired girl's blood. Erza. His eyebrows scrunched up in confusion. Who was that? Who was Erza? A peculiar name, one which he had never heard of. A voice repeated the name 2 more times, and slowly footsteps drew his attention to the metal rugged gate that laid across from him and the girl. His right eye lifted up to gaze at the gate. Slowly it opened and the same voice called out, Erza. Erza, without end, and then it stopped and the sound of metal clashing against the ground hit his ears. He could see a little better now. The gate slowly opened and bare feet came into visual range. A bloodied sword lay next to the entrance of the gate. And then it ran around him and to the girl to his left. Erza, what did they do to you? He whimpered. Get up, I'm going to fight them, for everyone's freedom. Fool, Sasuke didn't have the strength, and if he did he would have scoffed. One thing became clear to him now. The girl's name was Erza. And the voice that had called out to her was a boy. His voice was meager yet determined. The word, freedom, echoed in his mind and he wondered where exactly he was. His eyes were blurry from the overuse of his Sharingan and it was a miracle he could even see. The light from his eyes was fading. What? She questioned. He grew shocked. After all that, she was still able to speak though in panted breaths. He felt hands on his shoulders. It shook him as the boy's voice from before rattled him from his unwavering sleep. Hey, Ni-san. Wake up, come on. You got to get up, I can't carry Erza out of here all by myself. I need your help. Help, a foreign term to him. He chose to ignore it and his eyes shut. Get up, come on. Those guards are gonna come back soon and we nay. He stopped and Sasuke knew why. Footsteps and then a cry, a scream of pain and a shout of anger. You little brat. You killed 2 of my men. Get off me. The boy shouted and quickly he was silenced by a punch to his face. Sasuke ignored it all and then the boy was dragged out from the small rocky prison. His screams however never died down and Sasuke just wanted to fall into the darkness. Erza, Ni-san. You got to help Erza, please. And then, silence. The fallen Avenger presumed he was either dead or just knocked out. The former most likely. All he could do now was ponder and wait. He needed his strength back and that is what he intended to do, rest. His answers would come to him when the screams died down. The blood around him and his cellmate took him back to the massacre. The bloody massacre of the cursed Uchiha clan. His older brother, nothing more than a sacrificial pawn in a long-standing power struggle. They were no more and so was his brother. Used as a dog to carry out the Leaf's orders. But his lips unconsciously twirled into a smirk. A part of his vengeance was fulfilled. The elder Danzo was dead, and in this realm between the living and the dead, he had to wonder what came next. Jelal, she whispered. His ears perked up and his left eye opened slowly to see the small scarlet-haired girl laying to his side slowly get up, struggling. He looked away, she did not have enough strength. Step by step she walked forward and then with a whimper, she fell once more. Sasuke's eyelids slowly opened as a small weight appeared on his back. He could feel the cold liquid seeping through his shirt. He couldn't tell if it was tears or blood. She didn't move and Sasuke knew she had fallen on his back. Irritation brewed in him. But he could care less. He drifted into sleep. Sleep that promised no pain. His eyes twitched. He could hear small sobs of cries on his back. So they were tears, bloody tears of sadness. Hours passed and he slowly felt his strength coming back to him. As his eyes opened, the weight on his back was not present anymore. And he began to wonder what had happened to the little girl. He had enough chakra now to move, and the bleeding had stopped from his eyes and his injuries. He pushed himself off the ground and dragged himself to the darker part of the asylum and placed his back against the rocky walls that surrounded him. With a small groan, he tilted his neck upwards to examine where he actually was. A prison, one of Orochimaru's? He had to wonder. Only that damn snake would have built something like this. If it was, who was it who brought him here? The rugged cell gate opened once more and a hoarse voice shouted. Get in there, you maggot! And then a small black silhouette of a child hit the ground. Her cry of pain resonated within the prison and Sasuke knew who it was. The same scarlet-haired girl that had pleaded him to help was groveling on the ground before him. Her body scrunched up in fear, he would guess. His eyes slowly looked up to the guard who grinned back at him. Oh, so our new slave is awake, is he? The guard chuckled. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Slave? He was no one's slave. He kept silent as the guard drowned himself in teases of superiority mocking the Avenger. You should be grateful that you have both your eyes. Take a look at that insect. He motioned to the girl shivering in pain on the cold ground before him. And Sasuke's eyes momentarily widened in surprise and pity. A small white patch was settled on her right eye. thin white lines above and below her left eye holding the patch onto the back of her head, keeping it in place to hide her shattered right eye. Sasuke's eyelids half closed on itself and he looked to the guard once more. Slowly his black eyes turned into red ones and then all in an instant. He caught them in pain, not enough chakra. And his hands slowly came to his sides. He needed more time. The guard just kept up his arrogant smirk. Rest all you need to. 6 hours from now. You'll be working like a dog. And then he walked away from the gate leaving Sasuke to ponder on his words. The girl, Erza, slowly panted and walked towards him, his right eyebrow raised up in concern, and then he watched as she seated herself next to him in the coldness of their prison. He didn't glance back at her, but the same couldn't be said about her. She snuck glances at him. Her eyes moved about examining his features. Dried blood running from his right eye. His clothes were torn, as if spears were struck into him. His whole body was ragged with injuries. Remnants of dust and ash adorned his skin. An eerie sense of dread covered her, as if the darkness itself was aiming to drown her. But she felt a faint sense of light from him, as if the warm light inside him was waiting to pour out of him, to shine. What are you looking at? His voice echoed through the room, cold, rude, and she looked away from him, murmuring, and nothing. And just like that, their chance of conversation was cut. Silence ensued between them and Erza wondered, her mind made up. Her soft voice protruded forward to the older boy. Did they hurt you? 2. Silence was her answer, and she slowly looked away from him. Her gaze softened in sadness. Her eyes, however, widened. His cold voice resonated to her. No. Her gaze fell back to him. He was just as he was before, unmoving and unrelenting, looking to the gate. Then how did you? She began. I fought someone, he answered, and Erza's mind lit up in surprise. The sides of her lips twirled upwards into a smile and her hands patted the ground. Are you a mage? He blinked at her, unable to comprehend the word. Mage? What was she talking about? He shrugged it off with a simple, no, I'm not. Oh, a disappointed sigh. He had to laugh. How long had it been since someone was actually disappointed in him? He clenched and opened his fist. He had enough chakra now, but not enough for a full-scale assault. Her voice protruded to him once more. Ni-san. What's your name? I've never seen you here before. He didn't answer her, rather just remained in silence and looked to the gate. Erza, however, let out a disappointed sigh at his silence. Another hour of rest might restore all of his chakra, and that was all he needed. The silence in the prison was suffocating. Even to him. He watched as she got up and moved towards the gate. She tried pushing the gate forward, but to no avail. Sasuke's vision grew blurry once more, a transition from clear to blurry. He shook his head to shake it away. Thankfully it went away. He looked to Erza, who tried to push her way out of the gate. He let out a sigh, not one that she could hear, and then stood up, slowly. He placed his right hand on the back of the wall. Using it as a support, he panted, his eyes narrowed onto the gate before him. He walked forward little by little. His footsteps resounded within the room and Erza looked back to him. Ni-san? He paid her no mind, and then his coal-black eyes narrowed onto the gate. Stay behind me. She blinked. What are you doing? He didn't answer, rather waited for her to come behind him. And she did after a moment of tense silence. Her eyes followed his right arm. He slowly lifted it, and then a small blue spark of electricity resonated within it. Her eyes grew large in awe as the blue spark of electricity twisted into a fine line. And then as a sword pierced the gate. A grunt from Sasuke, and then the blue line of electricity divided itself into a finite amount of branches. Sasuke's gaze reached back to Erza, who stood in awe. Close your eyes, she obeyed without question. Sasuke's cold gaze then fell onto the gate. With a flick of his wrist, another surge of electricity passed through the thin line of electricity. The door exploded. A thick aura of smoke covered the area. An array of footsteps appeared before the destroyed cell gate. Cries of panic from the guards resonated within the tower. What happened here? An explosion. Who did this? Their answer came all too swiftly. Red eyes tore through the smoke and the guards quivered in fear. What? What is that? Is that a demon? The smoke slowly cleared and their eyes widened in surprise to see Sasuke standing before them. Erza was behind him, hiding. The prisoners? They've escaped. Put them down. Sound the alarm. A sick grin adorned Sasuke's face. his neck tilted to his right. Come on, and then he burst forward with speed. Groans of pain, screams of hurt tore through the air. As the dust settled, Sasuke stood in front of a guard choking him by his neck. Start talking. You'll never get Awa Urrk. His grip over the guard's neck tightened and Erza shivered. There was something wrong. She could feel it. Please spra me. Answer my questions, he stated once more. The guard nodded numbly and Sasuke proceeded to question him. What is this place? Why are children chained here like slaves? The guard cowered in fear. He stuttered, This place is the Tower of Heaven. People who are forced to stay here are not considered as children or adults. They are nothing but servants of Lord Z. Zarif. Sasuke's eyes widened as the man began cackling with craze. You won't escape. Zarif-sama won't let you. He is the embodiment of darkness. At this the guard's eyes widened and he stopped his laughter. Sasuke's mouth twirled into a sadistic grin, and his eyes turned deathly red, and then into a six-pointed star. Darkness. His darkness is nothing compared to my despair, and then slowly his grip on the man tightened. Erza cowered, shivered in fear, and whispered, Nisan, stop it. Sasuke didn't. Slowly the Chidori lit up in his right arm once more. He drew it closer and closer to the guard's head. Stop it, she whispered again. He drew back his right arm and moved to plunge it straight into the guard's head. Danzo's ghost stood before him and Sasuke enjoyed torturing him every bit. Stop it. He shook his head and his right hand stopped, twitching, his eyes widened and he let the guard fall to the ground. The Chidori faded in his arms and he looked back slowly to see Erza panting. She stumbled downwards exhausted from her outburst. This kid, he wondered, and then he looked back to the fallen guard who glanced at him in fear. Where is my blade? He questioned. To the room. In the lower left side at the end of this cave, he murmured. Slowly he gazed into Sasuke's eyes. Sleep, he commanded with his red Sharingan eyes, and the guard did as commanded, his head tilted to his right and his eyes closed. He glanced back to Erza one last time and proceeded to walk away from her, into the lower left side of the cave. She called out to him once more, Wait, where are you going? He didn't stop but continued to move forward, with the strength she had recovered. She ran after him, step by single step, limping. A few seconds later, Sasuke had outwalked the girl and had entered the provisions room. His gaze lingered around the room and fell onto his Chikuto. It laid on the Akatsuki cloak, along with the container of liquid that consisted of his brother's eyes. He walked forward and collected it. He placed the sheath of his Chikuto into the rope-lined cloth that was tied around his waist. He grabbed the container and then with a small poof, it disappeared and formed itself onto an armband to his left arm, the same as with the cloak. Small panted breaths caught his attention and he turned back. Erza looked up to see him now equipped with a sword. Sasuke blinked. Her face scrunched up in anger and she shouted at him. You liar! You're a mage! He raised an amused eyebrow at her, and as he walked forward, he stopped in front of her, brought up his right hand and with 2 fingers poked her forehead, sending her staggering back 2 steps. I'm not, an. Well, there was chapter 1, and I'm kinda starting from where Sasuke lost his mind when he faced both Kakashi and Naruto. I'm building up his character from there, so expect more crazy Sasuke scenes. Anyway, sorry for the short chapter. I got a big exam coming up, so I wanted to deal with Tot first before I update any of my other stories. And it looks like Sasuke is talking with the cages in the manga laughing face. Hopefully he may change into upcoming chapters. And oh yeah, Storm 3. You guys can add me if you want to play online on the PS3. My PSN id is in my profile. So check it out. Laughing face, hope to see you soon. Till then, adios. Despair disclaimer. I in no shape or form own the characters or settings of Naruto or Fairy Tail. To Crimson 11116. No worries. That is why I implemented Sasuke to have Itachi's eyes in this story. He'll use it only after coming to a major decision. I know, yes, he's going blind. That will also factor into his decision. Thank you for the review, laughing face. To Lightning Blade 49. Thank you for the idea. Yeah. I will make Sasuke cross paths with Naruto, but only after a long time. Laughing face, thanks for the review. To Mars 09. And I love your reviews, haha laughing face. To Apocalypse Legionnaire 117. Not enough crazy Sasuke in this chapter, but maybe in the next. Laughing face. And Sasuke will come into play after a major decision that Sasuke will take when he's with Erza. Shocked face. No way. Sasuke didn't kill Itachi. Itachi let himself die. Sasuke could never kill Itachi. Equals. It is an insult. Itachi would beat down Sasuke any day. To War Acolyte. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I really need to recheck the chapters before I post. Usually I go back and fix the mistakes but have been lazy as of late. We'll start again, hehe. Thank you for the review. Carrot to Reven 228. Crazy Sasuke will have a lot of clashes with Erza. Thanks. Hope you continue to read. Laughing face. To AAAHHHHHH. Glad it's got you hooked. Laughing face. I hope you continue to read. Laughing face. To Triumphant Loser. HHAHA. Thank you for your interest. Laughing face. I hope you continue to read and I hope you enjoy the story. To Xbox 432. Hopefully, I get his crazy side right. Thanks for the review. To Mooseman 3. Thank you. Hope you continue to read. To Theanfunny 9. Actually, in some of my other stories, Sasuke is broody, but in this he's not, cause I wanted to cover his guilty crazed side. Thanks for reading. Laughing face, and thank you for your review. To Not Some Random Guy. Thanks, I don't really see the need for Sasuke bashing. If anyone needs character bashing, it's Obito. Cheeky smiley face. Thanks for the review. To Guest. It's not a Sasuke x Erza fanfic. To X Justified. Crazy Sasuke is not fun. Shocked face. He's crazy, haha. To Hokage no Naruto. Yeah, sorry for not updating. Had a writer's block. Will be frequent with the updates. Hope you continue to read. Laughing face. To Wixland Lone Star. You guessed correctly. Erza will be a trigger for Sasuke's consciousness. It'll play out a lot more in the chapters to come. Thanks for your input. Hope you continue to read. Laughing face. To Tebow. It'll be a lot of work. First, he has to come to terms with himself not being in his own world. Secondly, it's gonna drive him to an edge to search for a way back. Hopefully I can pull it off. Thanks for the review. To Doobie the Doobie. Batshit insane. Sasuke. Oh, Raiden fan. High five bro. Laughing face. I considered that, but the only thing he would do is rest or brood, but considering the personality I had intended for Sasuke, he wouldn't just sit still. And no, I don't think he'll give Erza Itachi's eyes. Sasuke will be too sentimental about it. He won't part with it. And also Itachi's eyes are inactive, meaning his eyes are coal black. The Sharingan needs to be online in order to be useful to a non-Uchiha, as in Kakashi and Obito's case. To Darth Lelouch. Haha will do. Hope you continue to read. Laughing face. To Kitsune Dragon. I haven't actually thought about Sasuke joining Fairy Tail at the moment. I'm still wondering about that since every crossover in the Naruto and Fairy Tail section is starting off with joining Fairy Tail. Hopefully some of the suggestion, like your Wandering Mage suggestion, might make me start planning for things to come. Thank you for the review. Laughing face to Nightfire 237. Oh, no worries, he will have an epic encounter with Naruto, but it'll be really far into the story, hehe. Laughing face. To Danish 78. Actually, haha, Revenge to Redemption was my first ever story. It was the first time I ever got into writing, so that's a possible reason why this feels more better than Revenge to Redemption. It's cause I've kept writing stories. So it's helped me improve a lot with so many reviewers chiming in with their opinions too. Laughing face, hehe. I hope you continue to read. Thank you for the review. To Led Floyd. Sorry about that, will be more frequent with the updates. To Kingreader. He has Itachi's eyes in a container. If you recall the Sasuke vs Itachi fight, Itachi pulled out Sasuke's eyes in the Tsukuyomi and put it in a container containing chloroform, I believe. He'll get the M's after a major decision. To Metsubu. Thank you so much. Laughing face. To Jono 343. Ha ha ha, I'm not that good, man, but if I can write this good, it's cause of Jesus blessing me with this talent. Laughing face. If you write a story you're passionate about, then in my opinion, you're a pro already and you can write better than anyone else. All you gotta do is compete with yourself, hehe. Laughing face. Thank you for the review. To Blooper. Thank you. Hope you continue to read. Laughing face, haha. Erza did get lied to lol, sorta, a white lie, hee. To the Naruto addict. Thank you, yeah will be more frequent with the updates. To Demondog 666. Will do, THNKU for the review. To user 627. Haha sorry, will be more frequent from now on. To fanfictions forever. I will do that in the later chapters. Hope you continue to read. Thank you fro the review. Laughing face. To hardcore. Ah, sorry hee. I will try and give the one who will inherit my will a proper ending smiley face. To Zero Uchiha. Thanks, hope you continue to read. Laughing face. To Koyetsu. I'm thinking about it. Ah sorry, hee. Okay I'll do my best to give the one who will inherit my will a proper ending. Hopefully lol but thank you for a review. Hope you continue to read this story though. Laughing face. To AC Skywalker. Thank you for the review. Laughing face to Align Gray. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Also about the poking part just think of it as a sign of things to come smiley face like an Easter egg haha laughing face. I have no idea how chakra restoration works. Sasuke was able to fight Kakashi and use two Chidoris, one against Sakura and another against Naruto. So I assumed he had a greater restoration rate than Kakashi. Thank you for the review. Laughing face hope you continue to read. Chapter 2. Despair silence, it's very being drowned out Erza. She stood in front of the older boy, an outcast, a pariah. She had not seen him before save for the 4 to 5 hours that had gone by so swiftly. And in those hours, she had seen the power of a mage or rather, what she believed to be the power of a mage and she had to wonder, who was this person? She drew blanks and her gaze rested on his face which looked down at her, his coal-black eyes dancing with amusement yet his face, the scarred being of seriousness had not even a hint of sympathy or compassion. A moment ago, he had denied that he was a mage, sending her staggering back with a poke. It had irked her, irritated her, it was as if the very action was mocking her strength. Hey, he thought in mirth, his coal-black eyes danced at what the little girl before him had accused him of. A mage? What was that? Or rather who was it? He was a shinobi. Someone who endured. Not a mage or whatever it was that the scarlet-haired girl had dubbed him. He gazed at her in cold calculating eyes and the little girl? She looked back at him with a glare. He watched as her arms stretched to the sides of the small torn skirt she was clothed with. She shouted. If you're not a mage, then what are you? Only mages can do what you just did. He tilted his head to the right, the very action. A shot at amusement. His lips drew into a straight line. What, would you call a mage? He questioned. Silence, just as he had expected. She let out a surprised gasp, and Sasuke watched as she fiddled. Murmuring. His eyelids half closed on itself, and his patience grew thin. The answer did not present it to him. A waste of time, with a single strain of thought, he stepped to her side and walked forward, away from her into the confines of the cellar dungeon cave. Her lone eye widened, and in an instant she turned to see him walking away from her. The symbol of the Uchiha clan embedded onto the back of his shirt. Wait, she called out. He didn't stop, moving forward. Her shouts fell on deaf ears and then his question was answered. A mage. His ears perked up and he stopped but he did not glance back. Seeing that her shout had stopped him, she continued. A mage is someone who uses magic. His eyes widened ever so slightly. Magic? The gist of fairy tales? Finally deciding on the matter that the girl behind him was lost in a world of her own. He walked forward once more, ignoring her running footsteps. She raced ahead of him and placed herself in front of him. Her lone eye pleaded and Sasuke blinked in surprise. Her short panted breaths drew his attention and she began to speak once more. Where are you going? With a glance, he stepped to her side. None of your concern, he replied, and then walked forward once more. Only to be stopped, he turned back to see her right hand clenching the cloth wrapped around his waist. Determination, a term that was relevant to him. He decided to spare her a chance to see what it was that drove her. Aren't you going to free the others, Ni-san? She pleaded. Why should I? He questioned, nonchalantly. A low gasp and a widened eye were all the answers he needed to see that the girl in front of him was shocked at his indifference to the plight of the prisoners. But you can save them, can't you? Rob Ji-san told me that people who have power are supposed to help others. So why won't you help them? She grabbed his wrists and shook them. The very action irritated him, but he shrugged it off with indifference. Tears threatened to form at her lone eye and Sasuke grew weary. Don't confuse power for responsibility. What I do with my power is for my own reasons, not for those of anyone else, he stated without halt. And Erza's eyes widened at his coldness, with an audible sigh and a serious gaze upon him. Sasuke spoke once more. Show me where they are. Her despair turned into one of surprise. What? She couldn't believe it, and so she had questioned him again. He let out a grunt and his tone came out more forceful. Don't make me repeat myself. Show me where the others are. Her lips twirled into a smile, and she nodded her head, running a few meters ahead of him. She stopped. Looking back, she pointed to the path in front of them. This way. Hurry up, Ni-san. He inwardly groaned. What had he gotten himself into? Boom! Ragged prisoners covered themselves in fear, from the resounding explosion that consumed them. The metal gate that had once cut them off from the dungeons now stood mangled and burnt and embedded into the jagged-lined prison walls. What just happened? A frail 11-year-old boy questioned in fear. Children, stay back. All of you. Another voice, this time one of an elderly man. The children did as commanded and scooted over to the edge of the dust-laden prison. The smoke in front of them cleared at a slow pace, and from it, the silhouette of a man appeared, menacing the very epitome of fear. The prisoners shivered as two red eyes emitted itself from the smoke. And then the figure stepped out of the smoke and into the prison cell. His red eyes slowly yet surely disappeared and the cold coal-black eyes returned. He stopped, waited. Who are you? One of the voices of the prisoners called out to him. His icy glare struck his answer all too swiftly, and the sound of small padded footsteps hit the rocky path and their attention was momentarily diverted to the second figure who arrived. Erza? One of the boys questioned. Her eye, she must have been through a lot. An old man murmured seated next to Otihi frail children. Sasuke glanced at him and then his gaze turned back to Erza. With small steps she walked forward with a smile etched on her face. Sasuke's face tilted to his left as he looked to the small scarlet-haired girl who drew up a storm of worry from the prisoners. And slowly he lost himself in the moment of the small happiness that came of reuniting the girl with her fellow prisoners. People who knew the same pain could understand each other after all. His moment of amusement was lost as the attention was now diverted on him while little Erza came up to him. Ni-san. They want to know who you are. She chirped, in joy. His gaze held steady and then fell onto the prisoners. He considered his thoughts carefully, revealing himself as Sasuke Uchiha, the missing nin. The one who had attacked all 5 of the cage could have implications on the prisoners and they would be charged with aiding a terrorist. Never mind that, he barked. Do any of them know a way out? She looked uncertain, and her gaze slowly fell back to the lump of prisoners that stood in a group to the far end of the jagged prison walls. Examining each of them, Sasuke could only see despair, sadness and the sinking feeling of being hopeless. Perfect. He identified with each one of it and for that, he unconsciously smirked. Turning around, his heel connected to the base of the ground and he walked out of the prison. What? Ni-san. Where are you going? Erza shouted, her tone of curiosity and concern. I'll clear a path. Stay there, he commanded, but he didn't spare her another glance and vanished into the darkness that settled in front of them. Erza's shoulders slumped and an audible sigh made its way out her mouth. Her determined gaze, however, never died down and she looked over to her fellow prisoners. Jelal told me that we need to fight. Let's fight for our freedom. Ni-san can't do it on his own, she argued, and for once in a long time, surprised faces, smirks and smiles made its way onto the face of the prisoners. Erza, you have grown so much. A single strain of thought ran through the mind of the old man. Rob, unconsciously a smile plastered itself onto his face and he knew that a change was coming and for that, a feeling of gratitude encompassed his heart. No, please. Let me go. Urrggh, cries and pleas of the guards echoed in the dark-drenched tower of heaven. Blood flowed freely onto the ground forming a stream. Sasuke slowly stood to his full height. Blood marred his face but it was not his blood, no. It was the blood of the guards who had begged for their lives. His Sharingan eyes observed the sight in front of him. Another group of guards stood in front of him, blocking and denying him of a way out of the wretched prison. He could feel their fear. He had cut down their comrades without a hint of emotion and, much to his surprise, he had savored it. The guards shook with fear, their grips on their swords loosened. Sasuke tilted his head to his right and slowly his right arm fell to his side. "Get out of my way," he told them, his red eyes peering into their very souls. "Q quit joking. You ma maggot, like we're going to listen a prisoner." The guard shouted. Defiance etched into his features, but if one heard clearly, fear encompassed him. "I gave you a chance," Sasuke said. And in the next moment, the walls of the caves surrounding them were drenched in blood. Bodies lay scattered everywhere and Sasuke stood amongst them, slowly sheathing his blade. He walked forward, and then he staggered, falling to one of his knees, he panted. "My chakra, it's not enough." Slowly his red Sharingan eyes faded into the usual coal-black eyes that held no emotion. Standing to his full height, he walked forward to a door that stood in front of him. Once he made it, he opened it and there, his eyes fell onto a child with blue hair, beaten and bloodied, and chained to 2 wooden posts. Sasuke hadn't seen such cruelty, except with his former master, Orochimaru. It had sickened him. He stopped, and a voice rang out to him. "Are you here to free me?" The child was conscious. Sasuke's eyes narrowed and without an answer, he cut the bindings holding the child. He fell to the ragged floor below him and panted, bleeding. The Avenger held his gaze on the boy for a few seconds. "Now, you die." Without even moving an inch, Sasuke's right eye transformed into the Mangekyo Sharingan. The guard shivered and in a moment, fell to the ground, paralyzed. Seeing nothing more to do in the prison, Sasuke moved to exit the room but not before the child's voice rang out to him. Wait. The Avenger's eyes momentarily widened, and he dashed sideways avoiding a sudden attack from the child who he had saved. The small child stopped himself from crashing into the wall of the cave and then slowly turned around to glare at Sasuke. But what surprised the Avenger was the sick grin adorning his face. "What's the matter? You and I are alike. We both hate this world, don't we? I can feel your hatred," the boy shouted, laughing. Sasuke did not answer, rather, he kept his observations to himself. This child, he thought in caution. He possessed power that was not meant for him. Laughing, the boy in front of the Avenger grinned sadistically at him. "Why you will be the perfect tool to bring back Zeref, and then, true freedom will be mine." Zeref, yet again. Sasuke had heard the name of this entity. Who or what was Zeref? His mind ran with questions. Blackness covered the whole room, and Sasuke could feel a sick dreaded presence emanating from the child. "Why, you can feel it, can't you? Zeref is here. This is the power of his hatred, his darkness." "No." The boy stopped his shouts as Sasuke let out a sickening laugh at him. "Power, hatred, darkness," Sasuke whispered, and in an instant, the blackness of the cave retreated and in its place was a dark purple light. The child's eyes widened to see Sasuke's coal-black eyes now red. "All of that is nothing compared to my despair," he shouted. Fear overwhelmed the boy who stood in front of the Avenger and cold sweat hid his face. Slowly he fell onto one of his knees from the immense pressure that originated from the Avenger. The killing intent threatened to swallow him whole. Slowly he raised his head upwards and glared at the Avenger with the small amount of strength he could muster. What are you?" Sasuke didn't answer, rather a genjutsu was forced onto the child before him. Without another word, the child before him fell into unconsciousness. The Mangekyo slowly faded from his eyes and his gaze turned upwards. "Come out, you're testing my patience." Sasuke's statement was unanswered, but he felt that someone else was there besides the child and himself. Someone was controlling the child before him. Of that he was certain. His Sharingan had seen a disturbance in the child's energy network. He waited a few more seconds and then a low voice resounded towards him. "Are you sure you should be bothering yourself with me? Your attention should lay with the prisoners, they're dying, you know." "And why should I care?" Sasuke questioned. The voice chuckled back at him, "Because they're the only ones who know a way out of this tower. That is what you want, isn't it? A way to escape." Sasuke remained silent, and then slowly a small smirk embedded itself onto his face. "There is someone else here who does." The voice didn't answer back, Rather, it knew the implications of Sasuke's statements, and without another sound, the voice which played against Sasuke silenced itself. The Avenger could not sense anyone around, and he assumed it was a sealing type of genjutsu that was recorded to play if someone had ever breached this area. His gaze slowly fell onto the boy before him. Without sparing him another glance, he walked to the exit of the dungeon. Explosions and tremors rocked the very base of the tower, and Sasuke wondered what was happening. Inside the dungeon, however, the darkness that had threatened to overcome the Avenger returned once more, and a voice played out to the small boy who lay unconscious on the jagged rock below them. Disappointing, but you'll have to do for now. Whoever he was, he had powers that I have not seen before. Hatred is his strength. I have to report this to the master. I apologize greatly for not updating this story. I was concentrating on my other story, Devils and Valkyries, and had sorta developed a writer's block for this story. Hopefully it won't happen again, and I apologize for the short chapter. I will make it longer in the updates to come. Until then, adios. Laughing face. If you have any questions, please leave them in your reviews. Also, I'd like to thank Kana a lot. She informed me of someone who had copied the premise of my previous story. I believe his name is Risky Uchiha 989, or something of the sort. I guess he's using my previous story, the one who will inherit my will, as a backdrop without my permission. I want to report him, but I feel I shouldn't because I believe he's trying to make it original. The name of the copied story is Fairy Tale: Rise of the Uchiha. I encourage you guys to read his story, but also to make sure he makes it his own. Thank you __. Until next time. Start disclaimer. I in no shape or form own the characters or settings of Naruto or Fairy Tale. To Lightning Blade 49. You're right. Hopefully I'll come up with something along the way, haha laughing face. To Kali Dreamin'. Hope this is soon enough? Laughing face, thank you for the review. To Nightmare 47. This is Sasuke without the M's. He will gain it later though. Itachi's eyes are sealed in his armband in a container containing chloroform. To Guest. Not exactly sure, but it'll be a really long time before I deal with his living and stuff. Thank you for the review. Laughing face. To Blooper. Erza reminds me of Kushina, haha laughing face in my O. This is how she obtained her boldness. From standing up to Sasuke. Thank you. Glad to know his characterization is working out alright. To Darth Lelouch. I don't mean to impose, but could you type the review in English? Haha. Thank SF for the review, but I think Erza should be with Sasuke a lot longer for a bond to actually develop. Sasuke isn't Naruto or Itachi. To Kana. Hey, hope it doesn't come to kick me in the butt later, laughing face. Thank you for the review. Hope you continue to read, laughing face. To Mooseman 3. I hope this was soon enough. Smiley face. To Celis. Haha. I think you did ask that. I missed out that review. Sorry. Updates might be once in 4 days or in a week, smiley face, but if I'm crazy, you might see me updating every day, haha. Laughing face. To Earless Spark 027. Well, most authors do it cause they feel that he hurt Naruto and Sakura a lot, and cause he tried to kill the two of them, lol, but his anger is justified. They fail to realize that. Skeptical smiley face. I don't think he'll go the usual route with Sasuke joining Fairy Tale. You'll just have to wait and see. Laughing face. Thanks, haha. Many people consider my previous story to be better than this one, hehe. Thank you for the review. Laughing face. To Jason Mosby. And another awesome review. Thank you, laughing face. To War Acolyte. It should be in his characters, cause I'm going for crazy Sasuke. His attitude will change once a certain amount of time goes by. Haha no, I didn't abandon it, lol, I was concentrating on my other story, Devils and Valkyries 13-2. Laughing face. Thanks for the review. To X Justified. Good to see you reviewing this story. Laughing face. Thank you. To Toostroing. Thank you. Hope you continue to read. To Wixland Lone Star. Thank you so much. Laughing face. Thing is, it's a lot easier for me to relate to Sasuke than Naruto. Naruto is a typical shonen jump hero, haha. You can easily write him off, but Sasuke is so moody that getting even one of his traits right is kinda difficult but fun. I'm glad you liked his interaction with Erza. There'll be more to come. Laughing face. Thank you for the review. Also, I don't think I'll got the traditional route with Sasuke joining Fairy Tale. Hopefully I come up with something different. To Adrian 11. You're right. But his personality will go for a loop once he realizes that he's not in his own world. That's where Erza comes in. To Danish 78. Ha ha ha. Laughing face. Wow, you are really enthusiastic lol anyway. Yeah. The M's is coming up. Look FWD to it. To Led Floyd. Haha, wow. Really, sheesh, I'm honored, hope you continue to read. To Cloud 9. Almost more hee laughing face, thank you for the review, laughing face. Chapter 3. Start. TCH. The ground beneath Sasuke shook violently, nearly costing him his footing. He was weary, running low on both stamina and chakra. Step by step, he walked forward, his blade drawn out cautiously. His musings went back to the violent tremors that plagued the tower he was present in. What was causing it? Or rather, from his experiences, he wondered who exactly was causing it. His eyes widened, an opening, he thought. Finally he had found out what exactly was happening below him. He stopped, his back bent ever so slightly and the light from below shone onto his face. Cries, screams and curses. It was all that he could hear. And slowly he tried focusing his vision onto the scene below him. A rebellion? He questioned himself in surprise. From his viewpoint, all he could see was an ocean of blood. Bodies lay scattered on the ground beneath him, dust and ash mixed and carelessly levitated in the air. He stepped aside with haste. A guard had moved to strike him down from his blind side, tripping him. Sasuke got a hold of the man's collar and hung him precariously over the edge. The fall was deep and the guard screamed, crying out to the Avenger. No, please, please, I'm sorry. We crossed you before, please forgive me, I don't want to die. Where is the door that leads to the outside? Sasuke questioned, anger evident in his voice. It's down there, where the slaves are fighting. It's over there, he pointed out. Sasuke followed his gaze and looked to see a large dungeon door blocking present on the wall adjacent to him. Finally, he mused, his gaze returned to the guard who pleaded and begged for Sasuke to release him. Please. I promise. IW won't get in your way, he shouted. With his strength, Sasuke threw the mage backwards to the dust-laden floor beneath him. He watched as the guard rolled over from the force of the throw and hit the wall. He staggered and let out a groan of pain. Sparing him a glance, Sasuke's gaze then slowly rested on the door that awaited him. And yet again, much to his displeasure, the guard that Sasuke had spared moved to attack him once more. Sasuke dodged and with a swipe of his leg tripped the guard, sending him falling to his demise with an agonized cry. Fool! His gaze slowly went back and rested on the gate before him. He knew there was no other way, and so slowly finding his footing, he jumped down onto the cragged patches of rock. Jumping from crack to crack, he slowly made his way to the ground where the rebellion took place. He stopped and watched as the prisoners retreated from their battle. They were losing, it wasn't surprising. But what caught his attention, however, was Erza. She stood on the battlefield. A small quantity of prisoners stood behind her. He watched as a young boy a little taller than her stood conversing with her on the battlefield. No less. It was careless, and in a moment, Sasuke's thoughts were confirmed true. A colossal blast of energy sent the young boy flying away from Erza. Dust and smoke embedded onto the field below Sasuke, and momentarily, he was blinded and was unable to see the chaos that ensued below. His eyes frantically searched the field for any sign of the defiant little girl. The dust cleared and Erza knelt down on the ground, an expression of shock and surprise. She was blank. She's going to die, a voice played at the back of his head. His eyes widened ever so slightly. He knew the voice. It was haunting. It repeated itself again. They're going to die. It slowly drove him to an edge and he shuddered. Of all the times, why now? He hesitated, and his mind set itself ablaze from the voice that constantly repeated itself in the back of his head. He gritted his teeth in irritation. You're dead, he exclaimed. Desperation and anger etched into his own thoughts. The voice ignored his own thoughts and it played once more. A sudden mist of darkness covered him, and in front of him, crows, black ravens called out to him. His eyes widened ever so slightly. Am I Sasuke? Get out. His expression scurried from fear into rage. You're dead? So stay dead? An illusion of his elder brother stood before him, donned in his Akatsuki robe. Sasuke watched as his beloved brother's lips twirled into a fine line, and slowly disappeared from his view, but not without a final warning. More than enough blood has been shed, don't become me. I'm nothing like you, he shouted, and in an instant, electricity crackled in his right arm. He clenched and released it, sending a thin line of blue electricity to the illusion of his brother. It flowed down, through the hallucination, without stopping, and much to Sasuke's surprise, it hit the wall from where the blasts had originated and expanded. The prisoners watched in awe as the wall adjacent to them sparkled with blue electricity, and then it slowly faded. "Uro!" He coughed up blood, and his knees hit the crevice on which he stood upon. Panting, slowly, his head raised itself up and his eyes widened ever so slightly at the sound of a scream. A pink circle of light emerged from the battlefield, and in its center stood Erza. The Avenger's eyes widened ever so slightly as her scream tore through the very confines of the tower. Next to her lay a body of an old man. He wasn't moving, and Sasuke knew that he was the trigger, but to his shock, he had not seen such power before. Weapons scattered on the battlefield all levitated in the air and slowly lined up behind and above Erza. What kind of jutsu? This power? Sasuke's thoughts ran rampart, and he stood in amazement as the weapons, swords, axes, spears, and a myriad of different weapons all moved forward, with force and speed, impaling all who stood in opposition to her. Dust and ash melded together once more, and in its center, once again stood Erza. Much to Sasuke's surprise, the door that led to his exit was now destroyed as well. His gaze rested on the small defiant girl who stood in the center of all the chaos, and his mind drew out questions which he knew to which he would never receive answers. What is she? He rested on the crevice for a moment and watched as the fight began again. He wasn't needed, nor did he want to indulge himself in the carnage. He had enough. All he needed now was to escape, and then, Konoha, the village, everything will end by my hand. His gaze remained on Erza as she led the charge against the remainder of the guards. He knew at this moment that the prisoners would win their freedom. Sparing her one last glance, he utilized the small amount of chakra that he had and shunshined to the exit of the tower. Battle cries rang throughout the tower, and Sasuke shut it all out from his mind. With a slash, Erza cut down a guard that stood in her way. She, however, made sure that she had not killed the guard, but as she had struck down the guard, a fleeting image was caught in her sight. Her eyes widened ever so slightly as Sasuke appeared before the exit of the tower, panting and bleeding. "Ni-san," she called out. Swiftly, she moved to reach the Avenger. However, one more guard appeared before her, aiming to strike her down. Blocking the strike with her own sword, she glanced and called out to him once more. It worked, and Sasuke's gaze slowly fell on her. He stopped, but Erza's concentration on him had cost her. "Die. You worm." The guard pushed her back and moved to strike her down. Feeling fear overwhelm her, she brought up her right hand and braced herself for the strike. But it never came. What came, however, was Gah. Erza's eyes slowly opened to see blood dripping down from the chest of the guard in front of her. She lay motionless and paralyzed. The guard's chest began bleeding furiously, and the cause? "Why did you?" Erza began. Slow pained murmurs ran from her mouth. Sasuke didn't answer, rather with a swift motion, he pulled out his arm from the body of the guard. His right arm slowly crackled with electricity from his chidori, and it faded. His gaze followed the cold dead body of the guard as it hit the ground. Erza's eyes slowly locked with the coal-black eyes of her supposed savior. They remained silent, and all that Erza could see in the Avenger's eyes was emptiness. HMPH, with a grunt, Sasuke turned around and began walking towards the exit of the tower. Wait, she called out. Erza, now momentarily distracted, turned to find another boy running up to her. Her gaze faltered, and in the next instant, she turned to look to Sasuke once more. Her eyes widened, however, to see no trace of the Avenger. Where did he go? Outside the tower, Sasuke collapsed onto the sandy beach that circled itself around the base of the tower. Blood flowed down from his mouth and onto the sand below him. He raised his head up slowly to the vast expanse of water that separated him from the mainland. Gritting his teeth, he grew irritated. Where exactly am I? He mused and picked himself up. Limping and with the small amount of chakra that he had left, he began scouring for an easier way to travel. A picture of a boat came to his mind, and slowly he scoured the island with his limited vision, searching for any kind of transportation. He didn't find one, and so with the only option he had His gaze settled onto the vast water body in front of him. Grunting, he began walking on the water by sending his chakra to the soles of his feet. He half expected Toby to appear next to him through his ninjutsu and transport him to somewhere else. He let out a small smirk. The very thought was absurd. He didn't need help, he didn't want help. The thought of his former comrade came back to him. Karen, he had sacrificed her to reach his goal. He had no regrets. Such a useless tool, he mused. That's what shinobi are, just tools. His eyes widened ever so slightly, and the sound of ravens littered his auditory senses. He slowly gritted his teeth in anger once more. What do you want from me? You're not Itachi, he's dead, so just stay away. My foolish little brother, what could I possibly want from you? I'm not Itachi, true, just an image conjured up from your fleeting emotions. The voice spoke out once more, driving Sasuke to an edge of anger and rage. I don't want any part of you. Just stay away, Sasuke shouted, and in an instant, he blinked in surprise to find nothing but the large expanse of water in front of him. Shaking his head, he looked back to the Tower of Heaven once more. Sparing it a glance, he walked forward to the mainland that awaited him. He noted himself to reach land as soon as possible. Slowly from limping, he began a fast-paced walk. 7 minutes and he had reached his supposed destination. Without another word or another thought, he collapsed onto the sandy beach beneath him. Tower of Heaven. Jelal, just like you said, we all stood up and fight. Erza's cry of happiness echoed throughout the walls of the prison that confined her beloved friend. Kneeling down, she slowly helped the boy up. Blood marred his whole body and flowed down like river onto the jagged cracks of rock beneath him. Erza, however, continued her statements with happiness. Simon is hurt badly and Rob Ojii-san protected me. Many others sacrificed themselves, she continued, and then with a shout of joy, she proclaimed, but we won. We're all free. Erza's gaze mirrored her joy and she watched as Jelal slowly got up, using her as a support. Come on, let's go, let's leave, Erza, he whispered. A moment of silence erupted between them, and Erza felt a sense of dread cover her. We don't need to run anymore, true, freedom is right here. A devilish smirk embedded itself on his face, much to Erza's surprise. I've finally realized that we don't need fleeting freedom. Jelal? Erza whispered, a question, yet filled with dread. He turned around and grinned at her. True freedom lies in Zarif's world. He walked away from her to a guard who desperately crawled away from the two of them. Erza stood confused and dazed, unable to comprehend what exactly her friend spoke about. I don't understand, she whispered. Jelal ignored her, rather looked to the guard who crawled away from his feet. This tower, he said, slowly placing his right foot on the head of the guard below, is mine. I will be the one to complete the R system. And with force, he pushed his foot onto the head of the guard. Erza's eyes widened and immediately her mind went back to Sasuke, when he had saved her by using his Chidori. Why you're Jay just like Hai, she did not finish her statement. Erza, he began, a sickening grin crawling onto his face. Let's finish the R Sista. Stop speaking such nonsense. She protested in anger. We're leaving this island. Jalal's eyes widened and then slowly narrowed at the statement that arose from her mouth. Without another word, Jelal raised his right arm towards her and with a blast of magic sent her sprawling away through a door. She landed down in the middle of a small mining area. With a grunt of pain, she looked up to see Jelal looking down upon her. Fine, if you want to leave so badly, then go, by yourself, he stated. By, Erza whispered, and her body shook with fear. Myself? The others all belong to me. I need sufficient manpower to complete the Tower of Heaven. Slowly, step by step, he walked down to meet Erza. I don't need you anymore, so leave. Jelal, please. Don't do TURRGH. With a flick of his wrist, Jalal's magic came into play. Two arms caught a hold of Erza's neck and began choking her. Jelal, however, let out a chuckle and then tilted his head to the right. I think you understand that what happened here is not to be spoken off to anyone. If the government catches a hold of this, the rare opportunity will be ruined, and we can't have that, can we? If by some means we are found out, then I will have to destroy the evidence, destroying the tower and everyone in it. Also, I forbid you from coming to this place. If I see you here, I will start killing them immediately, and I'll start with Sho and the others. Jelal, she gasped out. Slowly tears formed in her lone eye and flowed down her face. That's the price of your precious freedom. Go and live while carrying the lives of your friends on your back. And with the last of his screams, Erza's lone eye closed. The next time it opened, however, was to the sound of the crackling of branches and a voice she all knew too well. You're awake, huh? Her lone eye widened immediately and she awoke to find herself covered by a black cloak with red clouds. The light of the fire in front of her burned with intensity and her gaze fell onto a figure who sat to her side. His back lay against the trunk of a tree. His left leg was stretched out and his right leg was folded. One of his arms rested on top of his folded right leg. Why you, Ni-san? Sasuke didn't look at her, rather her gaze lay on the fire that burned in front of them. I'm not your brother, he stated, his coal-black eyes holding nothing but emptiness. She flinched as his gaze slowly fell upon her. Silence protruded between them and Erza's gaze slowly fell down to the ground, unable to reply to his claim. You don't know how to swim, he stated. He had originally intended it to be a question, but it turned out to be an accusation. Erza fidgeted under his cold gaze and then she lifted her lone eye towards him. No, I didn't, she murmured. Where are the others? He questioned, curiosity etched into his cold voice. She blinked in surprise and turned over to look at him. There, she hesitated. Sasuke could hear that, but the question was why? They sat in silence. It was a long way to dawn, Sasuke knew that. Erza's mind, however, flashed with the words that Jalal had beaten into her. With a flick of his wrist, Jalal's magic came into play. Two arms caught a hold of Erza's neck and began choking her. Jalal, however, let out a chuckle and then tilted his head to the right. I think you understand that what happened here is not to be spoken of to anyone. If the government catches a hold of this, the rare opportunity will be ruined and we can't have that, can we? If by some means we are found out, then I will have to destroy the evidence. Destroying the tower and everyone in it. Also, I forbid you from coming to this place. If I see you here, I will start killing them immediately, and I'll start with Sho and the others. Her lone eyes squeezed shut in pain at the recollection of the memory. Sasuke's gaze stayed on her. The silence was drowning, at least to Erza. He waited a few moments for an answer before he decided to leave the matter entirely. They didn't want to leave. They said that since they took control of the tower, they wanted to stay there, she murmured, hoping the Avenger would buy her explanation. He didn't. I'm tired of lies, he murmured. Erza's lone eye widened as she looked into the Avenger's coal-black eyes. His tone dropped to frustration as he looked back to her. Why are you lying? Tell me the truth, he questioned, his tone forceful and that of anger. I'm not, she protested. At that moment, she could see anger lighting up in Sasuke's eyes. Calm down, she's just a child. His anger slowly subsided and he let out an audible sigh. Without another word, he looked back to the fire that burned in front of them. Another tense moment of silence passed by before Erza looked to him once again. Ni-san, she whispered, how did you find me? Go to sleep, he commanded, and Erza's line of questioning was cut. Her lone eye, however, gazed upon him and saw blood flowing down from his side. His face was marred with dry blood which he had not washed off. Why you're hurt? She cried. Sasuke blinked, and his gaze settled on her once more, and Erza's lone eye widened ever so slightly as his eyes turned from coal-black to blood-red, and with another word from his mouth, he ushered her a command. Rest. Erza didn't know what came over, but in the next moment, she felt drowsy and without a single word, she fell onto the ground beneath her. Sasuke slowly touched the black cloak that covered her body and made sure it covered her whole body up to her neck. With another glance, he turned his gaze back onto the fire before him. Thoughts of confusion and anger flowing through his head about where exactly he was and the power that the little girl he had saved possessed. And done. I hoped you liked it. Smiley face. Until next time. Adios. If you have any questions, please leave them in our reviews. Laughing face. Distractions disclaimer. I in no shape or form own the characters or settings of Naruto or Fairy Tail. Hey guys. Been a while, huh? Well, a long while, haha. Sorry for leaving you guys hanging. Been about a year since I updated this. Well, I have no excuse except, well, a writer's block and life. Yes, dear old life and its sweet problems, but fret not, for I have returned and shall continue to update my stories once more. Chapter 4. Distractions. The golden yellow rays of sunlight greeted Sasuke's eyelids, much to his dismay. The sun had risen, it was morning. His coal-black eyes held weariness. Slowly they opened up and Sasuke's gaze rested on the campfire that was now extinguished. Lazily, he shifted in his seated position and observed his surroundings. His gaze slowly fell on a lone figure who lay huddled up on the rocky ground. Her scarlet hair lay unsettled and her back was turned to the Avenger. His cloak lay on her as a cover for warmth. The cold night had passed but wounds hadn't healed, both physical and emotional ones. He wondered as to what was next. Would he leave for Konoha directly? Or would he take his time? His wounds wouldn't heal in a moment and his eyesight was blurring with each glance he took. He decided to take his time to reach the village. After all, a part of his vengeance was now complete. Danzo was dead, but that matter settled itself into the back of his mind. The matter at hand was more pressing. Where exactly was he? The land of lightning? He had to wonder. The land of lightning did consist of more water than land, and he mused as to if that is where he exactly was. Shrugging it off, he slowly raised himself to his feet, but on doing so, flinched in pain and halted his ascent midway. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself up and stood to his full height. His whole body screamed at him. Wobbling, he placed one foot forward and began to walk. But much to his dismay, he couldn't, and in the next moment, he fell. Grabbing the back of the tree trunk, he collapsed onto the ground. Pain engulfed his whole body as he began panting. My body, is this the result of overusing the Mangekyo Sharingan? How can I be this weak? Compared to Itachi, I overused it in just 2 battles. I need to rest a little more. But his coal-black eyes slowly turned towards the sleeping figure that lay a few meters to the right of him. His gaze stayed on her for a few seconds and then he slowly placed his back against the tree trunk. His right leg lay sprawled out on the ground before him and his left leg was folded in front of him. He closed his eyelids and hoped to rest some more. Sasuke. The Avenger's eyes immediately snapped wide open and much to his dismay, a thick blackish-red fog surrounded him. He grew confused as a voice called out to him once more by his name. Sasuke. His attention lay in front of him and then his eyes widened ever so slightly, in surprise but more so in horror. No, he whispered out in disbelief. You're not real, he shouted back. Cold sweat hit his face as the voice warped into a stern one, but yet held a gentle hint of kindness. Sasuke. Is that any way to talk to your mother? My mother is dead. Sasuke shouted. His eyes lit up in rage and the Sharingan came online. His breath hitched, however, as another deep voice made itself audible to his ears. And whose fault is that? You could have stopped me, Sasuke. Sasuke's cold red eyes slowly glanced over his shoulder to see the illusion of his brother standing behind him once more, robed in his Akatsuki cloak and wearing the standard attire of the dreaded organization. Itachi's cold voice hit him harder with the next statement. But you couldn't because you were too weak. Sasuke's Sharingan slowly swirled and faded into coal-black eyes as the statement melted itself into his very being. He gritted his teeth as he moved to stand up, only to falter onto his knees and look up to the illusion of his older brother. You made me this way. I did so that you would be able to avenge the clan, and you did, but who would have ever thought that you would let others choose your path for you? What? Sasuke paused. What are you saying? He questioned out in confusion. Cold sweat hit his face and nervousness bit down on his whole body. With a callous smirk, Itachi bursted into a mirage of crows. Blood splattered itself on the ground below Sasuke and screams tore through his ears. Itachi's cold voice rang out to him. The one thing the Sharingan can't see through are lies. The Avenger's eyes widened and in the next instant, he found himself sinking, turning his eyes to the ground beneath him. A sea of blood and he found himself drowning. With a scream, he awoke from his dreams, sweating. A gasp and the sound of whimpering reached his ears and his gaze lifted itself from the solid ground beneath him and forward. His eyes widened ever so slightly and his neck drew itself back to see Erza looking at him with a gaze of fear. The front of his Akatsuki cloak lay on her shoulders while the rest of it was dragged across the ground beneath them. Hey, are you all right, Ni-san? She questioned, whimpering. Sasuke took a moment to process what was happening at the moment. Ignoring her question, he looked around and observed his surroundings. Placing a right hand over his face, he questioned himself for a moment on what exactly had happened. Itachi's voice rang through his mind much to his disbelief. The one thing the Sharingan can't see through are lies. What did he mean? Sasuke wondered, lost to his own thoughts. Erza on the other hand tilted her head to the right in a confused gaze and called out to him once more, "Ni-san." It struck Sasuke's attention and the Avenger slowly but surely turned towards her with his coal-black eyes boring into her. "Go to sleep," he told her, no hint of emotion in his bland voice. Erza's eyes blinked in surprise at the sudden command. She ignored him and pressed her question to him. "Are you all right? Ni-san? You were shouting, did you have a nightmare?" Sasuke's cold gaze turned on her and he had to marvel in surprise at the girl's courage. He ignored her question and then yet again, he ushered out a command to her. "Go rest, I won't tell you again," and with the command given, his gaze turned to the campfire that was put out. I should get moving, but what he said, lies? Could it be? He thought out and then he turned his gaze towards his front to find Erza still in front of him, keenly observing the Avenger. They spent the next minute in silence as Sasuke contemplated how to question her. "Erza," Sasuke stated, his voice cold and bland, "why did you lie?" "Huh?" Erza gasped out in surprise. Sasuke's whole demeanor had changed at the moment and she could sense a faint sense of warmness from him. She however looked away in surprise. "I didn't lie, Ni-san." "No choice then." Sasuke's coal-black eyes swirled into the Sharingan and his cold voice rang out to her. "I'll ask again, why did you?" His black eyes widened ever so slightly and his ears perked up at the sound of footsteps. It was faint but the sound of a breaking stick was all that took for Sasuke to raise caution. His face contorted into an unsatisfied frown. Erza's head slowly wobbled from left to right. The Avenger's eyes quickly turned to her and locked itself with her eyes. The Sharingan protruded and disappeared as Sasuke let out a command. "Release." Erza blinked a few times and in a moment came out of her trance. In a second, Sasuke scooped Erza and placed her under his right arm and held her by her waist. He quickly acted and placed his left hand on her mouth, effectively stopping any question she may have on the matter. Her eyes moved frantically and locked itself onto the right side of Sasuke's face. His face was marred with dust, yet his coal-black eyes gleamed with sharpness as he waited for the origin of the sound. A few moments passed and the sound of footsteps penetrated his ears. Erza's eyes darted frantically from Sasuke to the ground below her and in a few moments, she realized why exactly Sasuke had hoisted her up next to him. "I thought I heard something over here. I told you it must have been your imagination." Two men, Sasuke observed. One clad in a bright purple coat and the other in black. Each wore an inner shirt neatly tucked away behind their respective coats. A combination of light blue and dark pants adorned their legs and with leather-shaped boots. Sasuke watched as the two of them examined the campsite below them. "It wasn't my imagination. Looks like somebody was here," the shorter of the two deduced, kneeling down to examine the burnt collection of wood. He studied the worn-out campfire before turning his head to his colleague. "Looks like they still are," the taller of the two exclaimed. Sasuke's coal-black eyes widened in surprise and he jumped off the branch of the tree he was currently on with Erza by his side, dodging what appeared to be a bolt of lightning. His eyes regarded each of them for a moment and he stood to his full height with Erza still under his arm. "Well, what do we have here? Hey, listen here pal. You look pretty banged up. How about we take that little girl off your hands?" Sasuke glared at them. He knew what they meant, and what they meant wasn't a good sign for Erza at all. Their faces disgusted Sasuke. Lust was screaming off of them and he knew that if he let Erza out of his sight for a minute, he could think of the consequences later. "So how about it? Hand over that girl and we'll let you go. Hell, we'll give you some cash while you're at it. How about it? We'll make it worth your while." Through all this, Erza stayed motionless and looked up to the Avenger's face. She couldn't make out what his thoughts were. Was he actually going to give her up to them? She wondered, and yet, though doubts still plagued her mind, her heart was completely at ease. "Hey," the shorter of the two began. "What's he doing?" Erza perked up at the slow crackle of electricity. Her eyes widened as she watched him raise his right hand. It sparkled with electricity. She knew that attack. It was the same one that had taken down the magical turrets back at the Tower of Heaven. It was also the same thing that he had used to take down the gate that held them hostage. "Leave," Sasuke stated, his cold black eyes boring into their very souls. The two assailants wore a look of surprise on their faces as they watched the Avenger's right hand light up with blue electricity. "Hey," the shorted of the two began. This guy, is he a lightning mage? I haven't seen electricity of that color at all. Better be careful, the taller one whispered. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, the two of them weren't leaving. He had enough chakra to take them both on, but he wondered as to how long his stamina would last. His eyes slowly scanned the two of them in front of him. Neither of them moved an inch. All three of them waited for the other to make the first move. Growing impatient, the taller of the two attacked first. Don't get cocky, he shouted. Sasuke's right hand flickered with electricity even more violently and he glanced downwards to the little girl he currently held. Close your eyes, he stated. Erza's eyes widened and she looked up to the Avenger. Why? Just do as I say. Sasuke answered back. His tone now exhibited a slight hint of irritation and she had caught it. Erza followed and in an instant, a scream of pain tore her ears. She opened her eyes and watched as the taller of the two assailants fall down onto the ground. Blood began flowing and his body was drenched in it. Sasuke's eyes slowly turned to the second assailant. The electricity in his right hand never died down and he could feel the fear revealing itself from the shorter of the two. Unless you want to end up like your friend here, Sasuke began, his voice calm and concentrated, get lost. Why you? The man began, his lips quivering with rage and anger. How could why you? Erza's lone eye turned towards the man, she studied him. His knees were giving way, his lips quivering. His whole body was shaking whether from sorrow or from fear she wasn't sure. All she knew was that he couldn't fight anymore. Firmly her resolve began to build at the same time as chakra began building in Sasuke's right arm. The same blue light lit up and Erza's shouted at him. Ni-san. Don't. Sasuke blinked, and in surprise he looked down to the little girl huddled up under his left arm. I already gave them a warning, they didn't listen, he stated. Strange, he thought to himself. Why was he explaining his actions to this little girl? He barely knew her. What kind of power did she possess over him that he let himself explain his actions to a child nonetheless? Don't kill him please, she pleaded. His eyes held indifference, and only coldness resonated. He spared a glance to the assailant and then back to Erza. His tone grew with irritation. Do you realize what you're saying? Why yes, she quivered under his gaze. Sasuke grew silent and then looked to his foe in front of him. TCH, he muttered in irritation. Take him and leave. His left eye morphed into his Mangekyo Sharingan and a deathly aura surrounded he glared down the shorter of the two assailants. Slowly he turned around while carrying Erza. She let out a small sigh of relief as they both turned away. She was thrown into the air above. Her lone eye widened as she let out a small shriek. It died down however when her lone eye saw the sight below her. A knife had planted itself straight into the back of Sasuke's left arm where she had been huddled up just a moment ago. He let out a grunt of pain as he looked down onto the one who had attacked him. You think I'm just going to let you go after you killed him? I'll send you to hell. He shouted in anger and malice. His eyes widened in rage as he shouted out an attack. Fire make. Volcano. Sasuke's ears perked up at the mention of an attack. His thoughts scattered as he began deducing what kind of attack this was. His answer came all too swiftly as his coal-black eyes looked to the ground below him. A red circle had formed beneath him. One with words and symbols he had not seen, those that he could not understand. His eyes widened as he felt a simmer of heat and then both him and his assailant were covered in fire. Erza's eyes widened as she called out to him in worry. What she had failed to miss however was that the flame arose to meet her and consume her being as well. She brought her arms up in an attempt to shield herself from the attack, but it never came. Rather she felt the heat from the fire disappear and felt a certain warmness and as her eyes opened, the first thing she saw was Sasuke's face. The attack hadn't reached him. She felt relief seeing the Avenger unhurt. He landed on a tree branch and watched as the fire slowly died down leaving nothing but a few mounds of ash in its wake. Sasuke's eyes held indifference as he surveyed the surroundings. He almost had me, that suicidal attack, fire make, I should have finished him when I had the chance. His eyes went on then to Erza whose lone eye did not meet his, rather it went to the wound on his left arm. Her head slowly bowed in shame. He got hurt because of me, as if hearing her thoughts. Sasuke's voice reached her ears. I was careless. To a certain extent it was true. He had thought that on hearing Erza's plea the assailant would back off. He was naive. He wouldn't be suffering from the wound if he was more aware. Erza's ears perked up at the statement and she turned her head to answer. That's not true, she shouted. Sasuke's eyes widened at the sudden outburst. Why, you got hurt because of me? She whimpered, and Sasuke let out a quiet sigh and slowly looked down once more to the burnt corpse. Fire make. Is it another variant of fire-style jutsu? Why haven't I heard of this before? Slowly he jumped down from the branch and placed Erza down onto the ground, and he began his way to examine the burnt corpse. Erza stood still as she watched the Avenger kneel down beside the small pile of ash. Sasuke's left eye twitched in pain as he glanced down to the wound on his left tricep. This'll have to wait. First. His coal-black eyes turned towards the lone young girl behind him. Erza's lone eye didn't meet his gaze, for fear of shame of what she had done. Sasuke's eyes grew passive as he decided his next train of thought. He glanced to her and then to the tower that lay in the horizon. The tower where he had escaped from. He had found her sprawled out on the beach, gasping for air, and he had to wonder what became of the other prisoners. And then there was this strange variant of jutsu, fire make. It baffled him. Orochimaru knew every single thing that was there to know about jutsu, and yet why didn't he know about this? And finally, the girl behind him possessed a strange power capable of levitating and using weapons. Was it a bloodline limit like his Sharingan? Questions droned and ate away at his mind. He silenced them at once, and then his gaze lay fixated on the tower before him, and his cold voice tore through Erza's shame. Erza, tell me what happened to the other prisoners, he stated, his voice defiant. The scarlet-haired girl let out a gasp and looked away once more from the Avenger, caught in her emotional turmoil. She stuttered. They said that they wanted to take control of the tower and stay there. She whimpered, and Sasuke let out another audible sigh. You're not telling me everything, ga? His strain of questioning was cut in half, and he was sent rolling to the side, and his Chidori blade was sent flying. He stopped as his back hit the trunk of an adjacent tree. Panting, he slowly raised his head upwards, and his eyes widened to see the man who had killed himself in the suicide attack a few moments ago, alive and well. What is he? Sasuke's eyes narrowed as a sick grin adorned the man's face. You thought you got rid of me, huh? He questioned. He cocked his neck to the side. I'm going to make you pay, you bastard. Erza's eyes widened as well at the sudden appearance of their assailant. Sasuke's Chidori blade flipped in the air and slowly but surely planted itself beside her. She gasped as the man took steps towards Sasuke. He had withdrawn a blade and moved to cut down the Avenger in vengeance. TCH. Sasuke grunted out in agony. He couldn't move. He wasn't completely healed yet. Slowly he moved his right arm up, but before he could, the assailant planted the blade in his right forearm, impaling it to the ground. A shout of pain made its way from the Avenger's mouth as he writhed in agony. Oh no, I'm not letting you use your magic again. I'm gonna blow a hole right through your heart, just like what you did to my friend, and you know what I'm going to do next. He shouted, and Sasuke gritted his teeth. I'm going to torture that little sister of yours and then sell her to some greasy bastard. She'll be worth the dough I get. The Avenger's coal-black eyes lit up in fury at the mention of Erza. Stay away from her. He growled out in anger. Hey! The mage in front of Sasuke scoffed, and then the Avenger watched as a ball of flame was conjured up in his right arm. Say goodbye to your sister, pal. And as he moved to thrust it into the heart of the Avenger, with the little chakra that Sasuke had, his eyes moved to warp into the Sharingan and cast a final desperate genjutsu, but before he could, however, his eyes widened. What? And the ball of flame died down. It took a moment for him to register what had happened. His coal-black eyes slowly moved downwards to see Erza behind the man, his Chidori blade in her grasp impaling the stomach of his assailant. What? The attacking mage growled out. He turned around slowly and met Erza's defiant lone eye. With anger and pain blazing in his eyes and blood now flowing down his mouth, he raised his right arm to strike her. Erza moved back in fear, and Sasuke took the opportunity and pulled out the blade from his forearm, summoning the remaining strength he had left. He pierced the man's leg with his blade, striking him off balance. A scream of pain tore through the forest, and Sasuke grabbed his Chidori blade and slashed away. Die, he stated, and in an instant, the man fell dead at his feet, blood freely flowing from his body. Panting hard, Sasuke's eyes shifted from the man slowly to Erza, who stood in shock. Hey! A small smile played out on his lips, and the next moment, he lost consciousness and his body fell to the ground. Ni-san! Erza called out frantically as she zipped to the Avenger's side. Blood flowed freely from his wounds, and the young girl desperately tried to wake him up, but to no avail. A small whisper, however, etched into her ears. Whether it was an illusion she did not know, but yet it sounded so real to her. Thank you, An. Guess I'm a bit rusty, huh? I'll get back to writing how I used to. Well, you know the drill. Questions in the reviews. We'll answer them in the next chapter. Until then, adios. Nightmares disclaimer. I in no shape or form own the characters or settings of Naruto or Fairy Tail. Mr. Wintek. He already has it. If you're talking about the Eternal Mangekyu, then you just have to wait and see. Holy Knight 5. First of all, man, did I miss your epic reviews. Second of all, Erza had the intent to kill him, but she didn't have the means. Sasuke did, and from this chapter you'll see how Sasuke doesn't want her to be tainted like he is. His intention for her is to be pure, and it's not like he's going to tell Makarov that Erza did do that unless Erza reveals it herself. Zero the Obliterator. I have a plan for Sasuke, but it doesn't involve the usual route of Fairy Tail. He will take part in certain arcs of Fairy Tail, but not entirely. In the later chapters you'll see that I've changed the timeline for certain events and people that will directly affect Sasuke. Soulbow 109. Sasuke will deal with her concerning what she had done later on. Her character won't stray as much from canon, of that I assure you. Celis. Been a while since I spoke to you, man. Hope you've been doing well. Haha, yeah. Sorry about that. Hopefully I can concentrate on finishing this story now. I don't plan on abandoning it. Looking forward to your reviews. Metsubu. Haha, I don't plan to. Keep reading. Thank you for your support. Shadowox. Thank you. Really humbled by you calling it your favorite. Really glad to be back, laughing face. Guardian of the Univies. Thank you, laughing face. Crimson 11116. Look forward to them reaching Fairy Tail in a couple of more chapters. Festrol. Thanks, glad to be back. Laughing face SWSK 117. Really glad to be back. Thank you for the review, laughing face. Overdrive XT. None taken. Well, he fought Danzo, then was transported to Earthland without rest. Then he was locked up in the Tower of Heaven, and then while he was still recovering he used his strength to free the prisoners, then walked on water using his chakra, then saved Erza and barely slept. So yeah, I expect anyone to be weak after going through so much and not having enough rest. Darth Lelouch. Sorry about that, still getting back into writing. Been a while since I actually typed anything. Gravenimage. Thank you so much. It's been a while since you updated Legend of the Defiers. Really hope you finish that and write a sequel. Meech Mako. Thank you so much for that review. Definitely, Erza will be the link for him to go back to being sane and to actually care for people again. He still hasn't found out he's in another world. You're going to have to wait for that big reaction from him. It's going to be a wild one. Thank you for the support. Hope you continue reading. Kana. Kana. It's been so long. How you doing? Laughing face. Thank you so much for always supporting my stories. Laughing face means a lot. Chapter 5. Nightmares. The silence was deafening and all he could see ahead of him was darkness. His coal-black eyes wandered to the blackened sky above him. A blood-red moon awaited him, and below him, water reflecting the blackness of the sky above him. His eyes blinked and he surveyed his surroundings. This again, he spoke to himself. He knew what this was, a dream, no, a nightmare. One he relived 1,000, no, a million times. Letting out an audible sigh, he began walking forward. Hopefully at one point he would find something to wake him from his slumber. His slumber? He questioned. He recalled what had happened. That girl, she saved me. Saved? He had to scoff at himself. She wouldn't have even done it if she knew the atrocious things he had done. The blood of his clan members was his burden and he needed to cleanse their disgrace, more importantly, his brother's disgrace. His eyelids half closed on itself and he looked down to see a dark reflection of himself. He stared at it and it back at him. His thoughts went back to the fight he had engaged in, all to save a girl. What had caused it? Maybe he didn't want her to go through the same loneliness or the pain that he did. He could have just tossed her aside and abandoned her, yet why? He could only imagine. It was the only piece of goodness left in his heart. Perhaps, he reasoned, he wanted to cherish it even if the path he had chosen now was one of blood and vengeance. His weary eyes looked onto the blackness before him. How long would it be before he awoke again? And what would he do when he did? He had a child on his hands. He didn't want that responsibility. He didn't need it yet. Why did he feel that she was the only path left to him for redemption? The questions burned through his head like a searing light burning through the darkness. She couldn't be associated with him. He was Sasuke Uchiha, a missing nin with a bounty, dead or alive. If an innocent he stopped, innocent? No, he had caused her to be tainted, because of him being weak. He had caused an innocent life to be tainted by the blood of a man. He cursed himself. His hands clenched itself into fists. He didn't need to drag her down with him, she didn't deserve it. And then, he realized. Itachi, is this how you felt about me? He questioned out to the cold blackness in front of him. The darkness didn't answer back. He had a long journey in front of him, so he began his trek to relive the nightmares that always called back to him. His feet caused ripples on the surface of the water with each step he took. He wandered on, hoping to find an escape to the madness that awaited him. Ni-san. Wake up! Wake up! Erza shouted. Violently she shook the young Avenger but to no avail. He was out cold, his blood ran freely down the ground, seeping into it. She called out again and again, hoping that her savior would arise, but she was deluding herself. He wouldn't wake, his breathing was erratic and she wondered if she would lose him. In the small time that she had known him, he had saved her, chided her and fed her. Though his demeanor seemed cold, she could feel a hidden warmth to him. She stopped trying to wake him up and placed her small hands on her laps, clenching them into fists. I don't know what to do. She frantically thought out, if the young man in front of her continued to bleed, he would die. She knew that, she needed something, anything to stop the bleeding, and then her lone eye wandered to the corpses of their assailants. Small pouches were situated on each of their backs. Her eyes widened and she crawled immediately to their corpses, tearing the pouch away from their backs. She opened it and frantically looked around for anything that might help her. Her eyes widened. This might work. She found it, an elastic crepe band-aid roll. Quickly tearing it off its covering, she opened it and made her way back to the Avenger. Slowly she moved and seated herself to Sasuke's left side, summoning up the strength she had. She lifted his left arm and began to roll up the band-aid onto his left tricep and tighten it. She finished and hoped it would stop his bleeding. It did. Her mind wasn't at ease just yet. What could she do now? Her lone eye went back to the pouches that the two of them had carried but came back to Sasuke once more. She needed to get him to a safe place. With the little strength she possessed, she slowly rolled him onto his front. She let out a gasp and panted. He's heavy, I don't think I can move him far. She grunted and moved her way to the back of the Avenger, and tried to raise him from behind. She did. Her small arms wrapped itself under his shoulders and she pulled him, grunting, and began to drag him to a tree not too far away from the corpses. She finally placed him in an upright position, his back facing the tree trunk behind him. She let out an audible sigh and then stood up. Her lone eye surveyed the surroundings and her eyes landed on his Akatsuki robe and his Chikudo. She walked back and picked up the robe and then walked towards the Chikudo. She felt a sudden dread cover her. The blade was drenched in blood. She had used it to almost kill a man. It was out of desperation to save someone who she thought cared for her, but the blood on the blade sent shivers down her spine. I'll leave it here, she said, her voice trembling. She picked her pace and ran towards the Avenger. It was as if she was fearful of the Chidori blade, that the action she had performed to save him would come back to haunt her. With nothing else to do, she placed the Akatsuki robe on the Avenger, making sure it covered him, and then she too huddled up under the robe. It covered her entirely while it covered the unconscious Avenger partially. She looked up to him, her lone eye observing his marred face. She bowed her head and looked to the robe that covered them, pondering on what she would do next. She had a goal, one that Rob had planted in her fairy tale, but the guild could wait. What consumed her thoughts as of the moment were about him, the boy who had saved her. Who was he? She called him brother, but she didn't even know his name, but she felt as if she could trust him. She recalled that he had questioned her again and again about the Tower of Heaven and the other prisoners. She didn't know what to do. Should I tell him? But then the others, Jelal might kill them. Her thoughts resounded with worry. But if I don't tell him, he'll ask again, and I don't want to lie. What do I do? I want to protect them. Jelal, why did you have to do that? What happened to you? Her mind slowly drifted away with worrying questions and her head tilted to the left. Weariness overwhelmed her and she leaned onto Sasuke's arm and slowly fell asleep. The journey seemed to go on forever. With each step Sasuke took, he was confronted by images from his past, his mother, his father and his brother. After them came the image of his first team, Team 7, Naruto, Sakura and his sensei, Kakashi. He watched a memory played out in front of him, one in which he and Naruto had to take care of an ostrich. He found no amusement in watching his younger self and Naruto being pecked on by the bird. His eyes held indifference as he walked forward and ignored the laughter originating from his sensei and Sakura and then from the other members of the Rookie 12 of Konohagakure. Their laughter. I don't want to ever hear it again. He spoke up, his voice holding irritation and his eyes blazing in anger. The image disappeared and then Orochimaru appeared, Kabuto next to him and his second team. Team? He scoffed, they were just tools. A means to an end. Karen, Suigetsu, Jugo, tools who fulfilled their purpose. He had nothing to do with them now. Karen was most probably dead and Suigetsu and Jugo were most likely captured. He didn't care either way, whatever sentiment he had for them died after taking down the 8 tails. He walked forward and then he stopped. Is that me? He questioned out and slowly he moved forward to meet himself. His coal-black eyes widened and he stopped as he watched blood run down his mouth. His reflection was stabbed. He looked to the side before him in surprise. What had stabbed him was his own Chidori blade. Blood flowed down the blade as it lay piercing his heart, but that wasn't what caught him off guard and brought surprise onto him. It was the one who had used the blade to stab him. Behind his reflection stood Erza. His reflection shattered and sunk into the darkness below him. Her lone eye met his coal-black eyes. He was unsure of what to do. A small smile played out on her face and she spoke to him cheerfully. Ni-san. It's over, it's time you woke up. Sasuke awoke with a jolt. Cold sweat covered his face as he panted. Looking around him, he frantically looked around to where he was. The sun shone brightly upon him and hurt his eyes. He let out a small grunt of irritation. From the looks of things, he assumed it was noon. He felt something on his left arm and turned to his left to see a band-aid covering his left tricep. He felt another weight upon his right arm and he turned to the said direction and looked on in surprise. She's asleep, huh? The moment was peaceful, something that was long missing from the life of the Avenger. The dream hadn't irked him, it was something that he dealt with every time he slept, but the sight of the young girl in his dream surprised him. He decided to ignore it. It meant nothing to him. He let out an audible sigh and looked to the Akatsuki robe that covered him. She had done this, he knew it, but why would she even care about him? He believed that she would have left the first chance she got, but she hadn't, nor had he let her. He looked back to the corpses that lay away from them. His Chidori blade laid beside the man he had struck down. His gaze shifted back to Erza and he recalled how he had saved her, how he had caused a pure innocent young child to be tainted, and then slowly he moved to rise. His eyes were giving way. He was losing his sight. His thoughts went back to Itachi and how he had dealt with the curse of the Mangekyo. Shrugging it off, he arose, making sure not to wake the little girl up. He slowly placed her head onto the ground so that it wouldn't hit the ground when he removed himself. Sparing her a glance, he walked to the blade and cleansed the blood off of it, and placed it into its sheath and stationed it onto the purple robe. His eyes then once again traveled back to Erza and then to the tower that laid on the horizon. He wondered as to the next course of his action. I should leave her, he thought, as to that being the best course for her sake. His thoughts went back to his brother and what he would have done in this situation. He knew the answer. Itachi abandoned me. He paused, his thoughts clearing. I won't do the same. I'll find a place to leave her and then head to the leaf. His eyes, however, went back to the tower and his gaze rested on it. That tower, I don't like it. His eyes narrowed and he slowly walked back to the young girl sleeping away on the ground. Hey. He gazed upon her sleeping form. Not a care in the world, huh? Oh, how wrong he was. Erza blinked as she looked onto the sight in front of her, a sea of blood. Her feet were drenched in it. She quivered, she was afraid. She placed her hands on her arms and she shivered. Slowly her meek voice called out to the vastness in front of her. Is anybody there? She called out. Her answer came all too swiftly. A maniacal laugh, and she grew even more terrified. She knew who that voice belonged to. Jalal? She whispered. The laugh died down and the image of the once kind boy she knew arose in front of her, his face crazed with laughter. Erza, he called out. Said girl's ears perked up. If you ever come back or if you tell anyone. Images of her friends rose up, Simon, Sho, Miliana. To name a few. She watched in horror as all of them were cut down. She screamed. No. Tears ran down her face as Jalal laughed at her. I'll kill them. I'll kill them all. And then I'll kill Yoge. What? Jalal. Her eyes widened. Jelal had been stabbed. A blue light shone through the darkness, crackling with electricity. His body was lifted off the ground and thrown into the sea of blood. She watched as it drowned into the depths of the bloodied sea. Her lone eye went back to the light that crackled in the darkness. She gasped. Ni-san. Before her stood Sasuke, his right hand crackling with the power of his Chidori. HMPH, he grunted and then turned his back on her. Wait. Erza called out. Her lone eye gazed upon his, the symbol chiseled into the back of his shirt. He spared her a glance. The nightmare's over. Wake up. Wake up. Erza's eyes popped open at the sudden voice that aroused herself from her slumber. She looked to her right to find Sasuke kneeling beside her. His face was indifferent. Ni-san? You're okay? Sasuke's gaze fell onto the corpses. He didn't want to admit it. Thanks to you. He stated out in indifference. A low blush covered Erza's cheek and she bowed her head to avoid the Avenger's gaze. IEH. She stuttered out, seemingly embarrassed with the praise that was given to her. Sasuke paid her no mind and his gaze again went back to the tower that laid in the horizon. At the sudden silence, Erza's lone eye went to him and then followed his gaze to the tower. Her thoughts went back to whether she needed to inform him. The dream of him killing Jelal didn't help either. She didn't want her friend to be killed by Sasuke. She didn't want to lose anyone else. Sasuke spared her a quick glance and then raised himself up. Erza looked on in surprise as he walked forward in the direction of the tower. Immediately her mind began racing. Ni-san. Wait. Are you going there again? Sasuke didn't answer. Instead he continued forward. Erza's heart grew terrified as she got up as well. Grabbing the Akatsuki cloak, she ran to him and called out to him. Ni-san. Wait. Sasuke paid her no mind. Instead he kept on walking. Erza then with a defiant resolve ran in front of him and stood in his path, blocking it. He began to grew irritated. Move, he commanded. He expected her to listen but the little girl would not. No. Please. You can't go back there, she shouted, begging and pleading with him to stop. Sasuke grew agitated as he glared at the girl in front of him. He didn't change his course of action. Erza remained steadfast in her resolve. Please don't go back there, she pleaded with him once more. I won't ask again. His voice grew in anger and rage. He was irritated. Who was this girl to stop him? She pleaded with him once more in a final desperate cry. Don't go there, I don't want to lose you or anyone else, she screamed and Sasuke's eyes widened in surprise. Lose? Was she talking about him? A moment passed as he understood what she wanted. She didn't want to lose him. TCH, such a fool. Sasuke thought out in anger. Calm down, she's just a child. Tell me why you don't want me to go there, he questioned her, hoping now that she would open up. This was a crucial moment for Erza. Time passed as the two of them stood silent. The scarlet-haired girl didn't meet his gaze. She quivered as her thoughts ran rampart. Finally conceding, she looked to him. Jelal, she began. Sasuke's ears perked up. He remembered that name. It was that young boy who had been possessed and tried to attack him. Jelal said he'd kill everyone if I ever went back or told anyone. I don't know why he changed. Sasuke's lips formed into a thin line. It was as he expected. The boy was possessed. If he assaulted the tower once more, chances are that he would overuse the Mangekyo. Something else awaited him there, something dreadful. He had recovered but he wondered if it was wise for him to do this, but something of that tower didn't set right with him. It reminded him too much of Orochimaru's experimental bases. At the sudden silence, Erza looked up to him once more and called out to him. Ni-san. Your friend said nothing about me going back, he answered, and then he began his trek to the tower once more, moving past Erza. The scarlet-haired girl's eyes widened as she looked to him and ran to him once more, but, she started. Be quiet, he stated in annoyance, and stay here. No, I won't let you go alone, she called out to him, you'll get hurt. He had to scoff. How long had it been that someone genuinely cared about his well-being? He didn't pay her any mind as he looked on to what awaited him at the tower. He didn't look at her but ignored her. She was fearful of what may happen. The dream she had a few moments before had frightened her. She didn't want to see Jelal die but Sasuke was adamant in reaching the tower once more. Hope and fear mixed into her as she followed behind the Avenger, hoping that everything would end well. She had seen his power and she wondered if it was enough to take down the whole tower. They reached the shore and Erza wondered as to how they would travel to the tower that laid in front of them. Letting out an audible sigh, Sasuke looked to her. Taking her along would only be a burden and it wasn't safe for her, but if he didn't know how to speak to the prisoners, nor was he sure if they would listen to him. Letting out an audible sigh, he knelt down and moved the Chikuto to the front of his robe. Erza grew puzzled as he looked at him. "Climb on," he called out. "What?" she questioned out in surprise. "I can walk on my own, Ni-san." "Don't argue with me," Sasuke snapped, irritation brewing in his whole being. He was letting his anger get the best of him. She whimpered and did as she was told. She climbed onto his back and Sasuke placed his arms around her legs, making sure not to let go off them. Erza slowly wrapped her arms around his neck and held onto him. He looked back at her, sparing her a glance. "Don't let go of me, MMHM. She nodded her head. Sasuke rose up, carrying her. He began to walk forward to the tower. Her eyes widened in surprise as she watched his feet touch the surface of the sea, but he didn't sink. She grew amazed as she watched him walk on the water. "Whoa! This is so cool, Ni-san. Can you teach me how to do this?" she whispered out in amazement. "He can walk on water. Mages can do that, can't they?" she thought out in surprise. "Maybe, and done. Things are picking up, huh? Expect a fight in the next chapter. Sasuke's really pushing it, isn't he? Expect the return of crazy Sasuke next chapter. As always, questions in the review section. We'll answer in the next chapter. Enemies disclaimer. I in no shape or form own the characters or settings of Naruto or Fairy Tail. Christopher 21. Thank you. Hopefully I stay true to his character through the whole story. MEL Smasher. Really slow. Shocked face Meech Mako. Oh, he has someone waiting to be paired up with him. Just wait and true. I really wished Sasuke would rely more on his natural skills than spamming his Mangekyo Sharingan all the time. He's really gifted. Celis. Wait no longer. It is here. Laughing face, Crimson 11116. Sasuke will do that. Read to find out. Kana. Yeah, wanted to make it up to you guys for leaving you hanging for a year. Beautiful, huh? Thank you so much, laughing face. Jesus gifted me with a really cool talent, haha. Anyway, I'm glad to hear that you're doing fine. Laughing face, hope you keep reading. Shadowx. Thanks, more interactions to come. The light has truth. Took me long with the chapter, or the took me long leaving you guys for a year thing, haha. __. Gravenimage. Thank you, haha. Man, that really sucks. I really hope you start writing again. Been waiting a while to read Legend of the Defiers again. It's such a great story. Shadow of Hearts she. Thank you for your support, laughing face. Darth Lelouch. I might make Sasuke to learn magic. We'll just have to see how it goes, haha. Metsubu. Thank you for thy support. Hope you continue reading. Festrol. I'll keep that in mind, haha. Yeah, gotta make it up to you guys, haha. Laughing face. Raphael plus Mikey. I know, I'm just pushing him for the time being of the story. He's gonna hit unconsciousness again pretty soon. Anyway, thank you for reading this FIC. Laughing face, I'm glad it caught your interest. Chapter 6. Enemies. Ni-san. Erza's meek voice called out to Sasuke, the Avenger, who in turn didn't acknowledge it. He didn't feel like speaking at the moment. A few seconds passed as Erza let out an audible sigh and nuzzled herself into the back of Sasuke's neck. He didn't answer her. She was disappointed. Maybe he was still angry that she tried to stop him from going back to the Tower of Heaven. Sasuke felt her forehead touch the back of his neck. He knew she was drooping. What is it? He asked her, his voice cold and silent. Immediately Erza perked up. So he wasn't ignoring me. She was happy. A smile resounded on her face, not one that Sasuke could see. She stuttered. Sasuke took that moment to glance back at her, awaiting her response. Why are you helping me? She questioned him. He turned his head to the front, concentrating on the tower. Another round of silence, and Sasuke's coal-black eyes fell onto the surface of the sea. People with power are supposed to help others. He paraphrased, repeating the same line he had heard. Erza's eyes widened. It was her who had told him that he should help people because he possessed power. Her memory went back to the time when Sasuke had freed her from the prison cell. XX flashback XX. Aren't you going to free the others, Ni-san? She pleaded. Why should I? He questioned, nonchalantly. A low gasp and a widened eye were all the answers he needed to see that the girl in front of him was shocked at his indifference to the plight of the prisoners. But you can save them, can't you? Rob Ji-san told me that people who have power are supposed to help others. So why won't you help them? She grabbed his wrists and shook them. The very action irritated him, but he shrugged it off with indifference. Tears threatened to form at her lone eye, and Sasuke grew weary. Don't confuse power for responsibility. What I do with my power is for my own reasons, not for those of anyone else, he stated without halt. And Erza's eyes widened at his coldness, with an audible sigh and a serious gaze upon him. Sasuke spoke once more. Show me where they are. Her despair turned into one of surprise. What? She couldn't believe it, and so she had questioned him again. He let out a grunt and his tone came out more forceful. Don't make me repeat myself. Show me where the others are. Her lips twirled into a smile, and she nodded her head, running a few meters ahead of him. She stopped. Looking back, she pointed to the path in front of them. This way. Hurry up, Ni-san. XX end flashback XX. When Erza didn't answer back, Sasuke glanced back to her. Isn't that what you told me? It knocked Erza out of her trance and she looked to him smiling. Why yeah. She answered. Sasuke looked away once more, grunting. HMPH. Another round of silence, and she called out to him again. Ni-san. This was getting tedious. Sasuke didn't glance back, but his voice answered her. What is it this time? He questioned, his voice now a bit agitated, but there was no sign of fear in Erza or her voice. What's your name? He blinked and looked back to her. Of course she didn't know his name. He hadn't told her. He mused whether to reveal himself or not. If he revealed himself, chances are someone would come after her for information on the last Uchiha and she would be in trouble. He didn't want that burden to be placed on her. But giving his first name only was an option. There were many Sasukes in the ninja world. He reasoned, but only one of them carried the name of Uchiha. Ni-san? She questioned again, snapping him out of his musings. Why, do you want to know? He threw the question back at her. Erza grew confused and Sasuke believed that the answer would have made her quiet. Oh, how wrong he was. She fought back with an even better answer than his. Well, you know my name. Why can't I know yours? She questioned in innocence, and Sasuke was caught. She beamed a smile at him, not one the Avenger could see. He silently grumbled, and then with an audible sigh, he answered her. Sasuke, he answered. What? Erza questioned him in surprise. My name, he began, his voice forceful. It's Sasuke. He answered her one more time. He could feel a smile embedding itself onto her lips as she whispered the name. Sasuke, she called out, testing it. It's a nice name. Sasuke ni. She beamed and Sasuke's eyes widened in surprise. The sudden call had caught him off guard. She once again nuzzled into the back of his neck as she awaited their arrival to the dreaded tower once more. Silence reigned between them for an oath minute before Erza struck a conversation between them once more. Sasuke ni. She called out once more, even though he didn't answer. Erza knew that he was listening. Do you have any place to go back to? Sasuke's gaze steadily fell onto the ocean floor. Memories came back to him. The village hidden in the leaves, he mused, Naruto. Sakura, Kakashi. He shook it off and answered her. No, I don't. Oh, a disappointed sigh from her, and Sasuke's gaze grew cold. He didn't want to recall his former teammates or his former home ever again. He'd rather die than do that. Erza calmly looked to the sea below her, watching as the waves came and went. Do you? Sasuke's voice called out to her, and she blinked in surprise, realizing the question was meant for her. Her head drooped down and she looked away from him. I don't think so, not anymore. They took all of us from our village and killed everyone else, she explained. Sasuke's heart dropped. It was as if this girl was the very reflection his younger self. Shrugging off the surprise, he questioned her. What was the name of your village? It was called Rosemary Village, she answered. Sasuke began to search his memory for any mention of a village called Rosemary. A colorful name. He mused, not one that suited him though. Silence reigned once again, and then Sasuke questioned her again. All of those children were from the same village? Not all of them, she answered. Only Simon and me came from Rosemary Village. The others, I'm not sure. Sasuke ni. Sasuke went back to his thoughts. The villages, or what's left of them, must be around the area of the tower. They shouldn't be far. And then he glanced back to the girl on his back. After we're done here, we'll search for your village. I don't think there's anything left. Sasuke ni, she whispered in sadness. Sasuke didn't answer, rather he hoped that they could find someone to take care of Erza. He couldn't babysit her. The life he led was covered in blood. He didn't want her involvement in it. He stopped. They had arrived. His feet hit the sandy beach that lay in front of him and he looked back to Erza. "We're here," he stated. Slowly he knelt down and allowed her to get off of his back. She did so and then looked onto the massive tower in front of her. Sasuke followed suit and then looked to her once more. "Stay near me." Erza nodded her head as the two of them began their journey into the dark confines of the tower once more. They found the entrance to the tower opened, much to their surprise. Erza glanced back to Sasuke, who gazed at the large entrance and then walked forward. She followed behind him. She wasn't afraid because someone was protecting her. She felt his warmth and she knew she could trust him with her life. They entered only to find blackness, craggy rocks. Erza looked to her right and found a set of stairs. She walked up. Sasuke looked on and then he too followed after her. On reaching the floor, he saw Erza standing in place and before them stood the slaves that Sasuke had freed. There were so many of them, numbering in the hundreds. He walked up and stood by her side, his coal-black eyes surveying the situation in front of him. Whispers abounded around them. "That's Erza. She came back. Why is that traitor here? She's brought that guy along too. What should we do?" Someone called Jelal. "Go back, you traitor. How dare you show your face here after what you did?" Were some of the accusations thrown at her. Erza's lips quivered. She didn't know what to do, nor did she know why the people in front of them were treating her like this. She moved back and closer to Sasuke. He stayed silent as he looked on. They were beginning to annoy him. If this kept up, he was sure they were going to attack them. Silence ensued as 4 people stepped forward. Erza quivered as she looked to them. "Simon, Wally, Sho and Miliana?" she called out. "Nay-san." Sho whispered out in surprise. How could you do that to us?" Erza stepped back in surprise at the sudden outburst of the once kind boy she knew. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. He readied himself if something went awry, and he knew something would go wrong. "Sho, calm down." Simon's voice called out to him. His jaw was bandaged. To Erza, it was a miracle that he could talk. "Erza," he called out. "Why did you blow up the ship and abandon us?" "What?" Erza shouted in surprise. "I didn't do da. Jelal told us you did." Wally interrupted her. "He told us you blew up the ship and then went with that man there." He pointed to Sasuke, who narrowed his eyes. "He said you became mad with your power and you joined up with him and took out the ship and our only means of escape." "No," Erza shouted, defiant in her resolve. "I didn't do that. Sasuke didn't do anything either. Jelal lied to all of you." Sasuke blinked. She was defending him. Will wonders never cease? He mused in amusement. However, he didn't have time for pleasantries or for jokes. His eyes carefully observed his surroundings. Some of the slaves had sealed off the entrance to the ground floor. They were trapped. "Don't you dare lie to us." "Nay-san," Sho shouted out in anger. "Both you and him are guilty. You guys did that and escaped on your own just cause you had magic. You're nothing but a traitor." Simon remained silent as he looked to the quivering form of Erza. He knew she couldn't have done it, but he kept up his act and his gaze fell onto Sasuke, who stood silently. "So, she came back, did she?" A voice resounded within the group. One Erza knew all too well. A blue-haired boy stepped out from the group and stood in front of them posing as their leader. Erza's eyes widened in surprise. "Jelal. You betrayed us and then you come back with him?" Jelal questioned out. "Erza, we won't forgive you." He smiled. One Sasuke had caught. "We have spoken enough. You came back, you lied to us, betrayed us. It's time you pay for your sins," he shouted in anger and malice. Tears threatened to flow down Erza's face. It was then that Sasuke stepped forward, his coal-black eyes boring into each and every one of them. "That's enough," he stated, and everyone grew silent as the lone avenger stepped forward. "Sasuke ni?" Erza whispered out in surprise. Sasuke didn't look back at her. "Erza," he called out, "stay behind me." "Oh, so you're going to protect her now?" Jelal questioned out in annoyance. "All of you, it's time we took care of him." "Try it," Sasuke began. He looked straight at Jelal. "Once I'm done with them, I'm coming for you and then for the one who's controlling you." "Control?" Jelal questioned and then he laughed. "Control? Or why you AF fool? No one's controlling me." He raised his hand and Sasuke's eyes widened as a shriek reached his ears. He turned back to see Erza floating in the air grabbing at her neck. TCH, let her go, Sasuke called out in annoyance. No, how about you save her? Jelal laughed as he tightened the grip on Erza's neck. Jelal. Stop. Simon called out. Wally, Sho and Miliana looked at him in worry. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, he was distracted. Each and every person in the room gasped as Sasuke closed the distance between him and Jelal in an instant. What? Jelal shouted out in surprise. Before he could react, Sasuke's right fist met the stomach of the young boy. He coughed up spit and immediately fell down onto the ground unconscious. Sasuke looked back to Erza, who fell down onto the ground as well. Whatever that held her was now gone and she was freed. She coughed violently and rubbed her neck. Sasuke stood to his full height and then looked to the slaves around him. Who's next? He questioned. No one dared step up to face him. Rather, all of them backed away as Sasuke began his trek back to Erza. Silence filled the room as he reached her. She looked up to him in gratitude. Sasuke-ni, she began. Go talk to them, he told her. I have business somewhere else. And then he walked past her. Erza stood up slowly and then looked on as Sasuke went on to the upper floors of the Tower of Heaven. She looked back and gazed upon everyone around her. She had a lot of explaining to do. Sasuke began his trek upwards. He had felt a dark power emitting itself from the upper levels of the Tower of Heaven. He wanted to know who it was or what it was, after his little display of strength. He was sure that none of them would even lay a hand on Erza, and even if they did, she possessed a power to protect herself with. Something even he grew curious of. With each floor he climbed, the light grew dimmer. His Sharingan came online as he searched for the slightest hint of chakra. He could see the children below him, conversing with Erza, but what surprised him was that the chakra he saw was of the color yellow. Usually everyone the Sharingan had come across read them in blue, but for some reason, each one of them below him was yellow. Is something wrong with my Sharingan? He wondered, and then he tested his theory, and looked at his hands. The chakra flowing in them was blue. He couldn't understand why it was different for the others. He shrugged it off. He could worry about it later. For now his gaze turned upwards with his Sharingan. He could see a mass of yellow chakra above him. That was his destination. Found you, he said, and began his ascent. So then, Jelal lied to us, whispered a shocked Wally. Erza nodded her head as she looked to the others. I don't know why he changed, but that's what happened, all of you. Wait, Simon began. Did you remember what that Nissan said? He said someone was controlling Jelal. So then you mean? Miliana cut in, eager now to defend Jelal. Simon nodded his head. Erza. The reason why Jelal may have changed is because someone is controlling him. Erza let out a surprised gasp as she looked down to the unconscious form of the kind boy she once knew. Do you think so, Simon? She questioned him, hope brimming in her eyes. It pained Simon. He was in love with her, but he could never tell her. Putting his feelings aside, he looked away from her and down to his friend. Yeah, at least that's what I think. Where did he go? Miliana questioned. Erza looked to them, providing an answer. He went to the top of the tower. He said he has business up. And then it struck her. She began to run towards the stairs. Erza? Wally called out in surprise. Nay-san. Wait, Sho followed. Both him and Wally followed after her, sprinting. Wait up. You guys. Miliana shouted. Then she too followed after them, sparing Simon a glance. The said person who in turn looked to the other slaves around him. All of you, I'm going after Erza. Stay here and watch Jelal. We can't trust him right now. Whispers and murmurs abounded the area, but Simon didn't care. He raced after his friends, hoping to reach them before any other tragedy occurred. Before any other tragedy occurred to Erza, he raced forward, hoping to reach his friends in time. Sasuke had reached the top floor of the tower. He observed his surroundings. Darkness laid in front of him, and a dim glow of light christened itself from the small hole above him, illuminating a small throne that was in front of him, along with a stand and a ball made of crystal. He cautiously moved forward. The yellow chakra was seeping in the whole room, but there was no one here, or so he thought. He stopped as a man appeared before him. The Avenger gazed upon him, observing him. He was a tall, elderly man with long, slicked back, silvery white hair, revealing his forehead. He also had a mustache, and a similarly long yet mildly thin and curly beard, reaching down to his lower chest. He wore a dark shirt paired with armored shoulder pads and shiny gauntlets, as well as chainmail covering the parts of his arms remaining exposed, simple light pants with flames near the edges, held up by what looks like a light belt composed of two straps with the relative buttons. possibly part of the pants themselves, and dark boots. I see, so you're the one who has been wreaking havoc in this place. He spoke out. Tell me, child, what is your name? Sasuke didn't answer. His coal-black eyes glared at the man in front of him and he followed up his question with another question. Are you the one who's controlling that boy? My, so disrespectful, but to answer your question, no, it is my subordinate, he answered. He moved to the side and Sasuke. Through cautious glances, the crystal ball at the end of the room lit up and Sasuke saw the image of a young girl with dark purple hair, her age no older than Erza looking at him. Oh, so you came back. He blinked. That voice, it was the same one I heard before I left this place. His black eyes narrowed and he didn't answer. You're not very talkative, huh? The girl questioned. Sasuke remained silent as he glanced to the old man a few meters away from him and then back to the girl. I'll say this once. Stop manipulating him. Wow, so you do talk, can't do that, you see. Well, I'll just let Master Hades explain it to you, later. And then Sasuke watched as the crystal ball dimmed, leaving only him and the mysterious old man in the room. He turned his gaze to him. He knew the man's name now, Hades. Now, you've interfered with us long enough. Sasuke glared at him. I won't bother wasting my time fighting an illusion. If you have nothing more to say, then get lost. Impressive. So you knew I was but an illusion, is it? But child, whoever said anything about you fighting me? Hades questioned out in mirth. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. He knew he had walked into a trap. Sasuke watched as Hades moved his arms in a circular motion and stopped. Nemesis, come forth. Sasuke's eyes widened. The room began shaking and the walls lit up with a purple hue, and in that moment, the door behind Sasuke opened and 5 children entered. Erza looked onto his back and called out to him. Sasuke ni. His coal-black eyes widened and he looked back. Erza? He questioned out, and then his eyes looked onto the 4 other children with her. TCH, all of you, stay back. Purple haze like demons slowly arose from the wall and began to surround Sasuke and the children. Hades looked on and smirked to himself. Sasuke observed the man and he grew surprised. One of his eyes was glowing red. A Sharingan? That matter, however, lost his interest when he found himself surrounded on all sides. Now, child, it seems you have your hands full. If you leave this place alive, which I doubt, the slaves below you won't. He answered as if he knew something, and then he looked to the children behind Sasuke. If you manage to escape, you can take those 5 children along with you. Now then, I hope you understand what darkness means. He scoffed, something inside. Sasuke snapped at the mention of darkness and he started laughing. Darkness? What do you know about darkness? He questioned in amusement. What? Questioned a surprised Hades. Erza looked on. Fear began to surround her. Sasuke ni? She called out in a silent whisper. Your darkness can never swallow my despair. I'll burn this tower to the ground. Sasuke shouted out, in anger and despair. Erza. What's happening? Questioned a terrified Miliana. I'm scared. Erza blinked and looked to her and then placed an arm around her, drawing her close. It'll be a light. Sasuke ni will keep us safe. Sasuke's eyes transitioned into the Sharingan as he glared at Hades, who in turn gasped in surprise. The purple demons around him didn't disturb him a bit and he shouted. Chidori stream. Blue current of electricity running through the whole room. He made sure not to let the current even go an inch near the children. The purple haze demons cried out and vanished, leaving Sasuke to stand up to his full height and smirk at the man. Is that all you got? He questioned in amusement. You, began Hades, just what are you? I don't know what kind of jutsu you used, Sasuke stated, but the moment I find you, I will slaughter you. TCH, don't get so cocky, you brat. Hades shouted out in anger and malice. Come find me then. The next time we meet, I'll give you a painful death. And with that last threat, the illusion disappeared, leaving the room back to its once darkened state. Sasuke's eyes searched the room for any sign of surprise. Finding none, he relaxed his stance and then looked to the children behind him. Sasuke ni? Erza questioned him and cautiously looked at him. Sasuke looked back at her. What is it, Erza? His tone held that of weariness. He turned around in surprise and she crashed into him, hugging him. Sasuke ni? You were amazing. You took down all those monsters in one blow. Sasuke let out an audible sigh and slowly brought up his right hand and with his 2 fingers poked the little girl's head, sending her staggering back. Ow! She cried out and glared at the Avenger. HMPH, grunted Sasuke in amusement. His gaze slowly went from Erza to the children behind her. The scarlet-haired girl blinked and followed his gaze, smiling. She called out to them. Guys! Come over here. The children slowly but cautiously walked forward and settled themselves in front of Sasuke. Sasuke ni. This is Wally and that's Miliana, and he's Sho and that's Simon. Sasuke didn't care about either of their names, however the children cared about his. Simon stepped up and looked to the Avenger. Thank you for, saving us. HMPH. Sasuke didn't spare them a glance. It was amusing to him that they thought he came here to save them. He looked down to Erza. We're leaving, he said, and then walked past her and the other children. Wow, he's a bit cold, isn't he? Sho murmured. Yeah, but I think he's a nice guy. Miliana answered, a small smile gracing her lips. Simon and Wally didn't answer, rather looked to Erza, who in turn began to follow after Sasuke. A few minutes later, they had reached the first floor, but to their surprise, Jelal was gone. The explanation that was given to them was that he just disappeared, leaving Erza to begin worrying. Sasuke didn't care either way. He presumed that the opponents he had faced earlier had used something to summon him. At that moment, the tower began shaking. All of them began their journey outside, and on reaching the outskirts of the tower, Sasuke's eyes gazed upon the tower. A purple atmospheric wall covered it. A barrier, so they're afraid. Sasuke thought out in mirth. There was now no use in exerting his chakra in breaking down the tower. He knew that one day, he would. And done. Phew, okay, seriously, update speed equals making up to you guys for leaving you hanging for a year. I apologize for that once more. Sorry, _. Beginning disclaimer. I in no shape or form own the characters or settings of Naruto or Fairy Tail. DCH 448. Thanks, hope you continue reading. Theanfunny 9. Oh, he'll have a lot more in his life come Fairy Tail, haha. Festrol. Who's behind my mask? I'm beyond my mask. P. Ha ha ha, thanks, yeah, it irked me a bit too, so I changed it back to Ni-san. Again. Laughing face, thanks for that. Will keep that in my mind if I need help. Madacore Girl 071134. Well, you gotta keep reading to find out. Soulbow 109. Oh, don't worry about who he'll be paired up with. That woman, however, will really play the hell out of him. Just you wait. Crimson 11116. Keep reading to find out. Laughing face Darth Lelouch. Not exactly, it's a nice idea but not something that's in my original plan. Mistgun 4. I'm still thinking on how to incorporate his summons. It seems that summons can be done even in different dimension according to the manga as of this moment, so I'm just thinking on it. Thank you for the review. Laughing face. Shadow of Hearts She. Thank you for the support, appreciate it. Doobie the Doobie. Haha, I just copied his secret factor in Naruto Storm 3 when he fights Obito. It'd seem like something he would say. Celis. You just changed Spidey's quote, cheeky smiley face. He's gonna be mad, haha, thanks. Meech Mako. He will change. His craziness is going down with each chapter, and I'm going to make him learn at least 2 to 3 magic types. It'd be a substitute for him to use compared to ninjutsu when at times it can be useless to some opponents in Fairy Tail. Yeah, I don't plan on giving him the Rinnegan. He's OP enough already with the Mangekyo, and he'll be even more OP when he gets the M's. Ko. You got that right. No pain. That's not going to happen. Thank you for the review, laughing face. Chapter 7. Beginning, the captives had found a boat behind the Tower of Heaven, much to their surprise. There were 2 boats with more than enough supplies to satisfy them, and so all of them had decided to leave the dreaded tower. All of them had finally attained freedom. The barrier around the Tower of Heaven had not died down. Sasuke knew it was pointless breaking through it. He didn't have enough strength, something that he had not recovered due to continuous battles. He could care less about what the prisoners would do. His eyes, however, laid on the small scarlet-haired girl who led them like their leader. For some reason, Sasuke could feel that it suited her, and so it was his time to say goodbye to her. He wasn't one for such things, and so as the captives readied themselves to set sail, Sasuke turned his back on them and began to walk away. But that didn't go amiss by the young scarlet-haired girl who called out to him, Ni-san. Sasuke didn't stop, rather continued walking away from her. This prompted her to leave the slaves and run to the boy walking away from her. The sound of footsteps hitting the sand caught Sasuke's attention as he spared her a glance. She lowered her pace as she caught up to him. "Ni-san," she panted, calling out to him, "Where are you going?" "What's it to you?" Sasuke answered back, his tone now colder than usual. The coldness of his tone had caught Erza off guard as she stopped behind him. She felt sadness at being treated like a nuisance. Sasuke felt her sadness, but he reasoned it was better this way. He didn't want to have any attachments, and especially not to a young girl who could be killed for her involvement with him. He didn't stop but continued his trek to a small rock that lay on the horizon. Erza bowed her head, not looking up at him. She wondered if he would turn around and look at her. He didn't, which prompted her to scream his name. "Sasuke Ni-san. Stop," she called once more, her voice propelling her sadness. That did make him stop. His coal-black eyes glanced back at her as he awaited her reason for stopping him. She didn't answer, which agitated Sasuke. "Tch." He grunted in annoyance as he looked back to her. She looked up to him and his eyes slightly widened to see tears threatening to flow out of her lone eye. She was sniffling. He didn't have time for this. Why are you acting like that?" she shouted at him, something that had surprised even him. A moment of silence passed. The prisoners behind her had heard her shout and, much to his dismay, had turned their eyes on the two of them. "Did I do something wrong?" she questioned once again, and Sasuke grew agitated with each word she spoke. It angered him. His voice moved to cut her down before she could begin another question. "Quiet," Sasuke snapped, anger blazing in his coal-black eyes. Erza's eyes widened at the sudden outburst and she staggered back. Sasuke's thoughts scrambled as he questioned himself. "Calm down. She's just a child. This is for her own good. If anyone finds out that she knows you, they'll hurt her. I can't allow that." "Ni-san." Erza called out to him meekly. She was confused. She didn't know why he was acting like this. She didn't understand. All she could do was cry as her so-called brother raised his voice against her, controlling his anger. He slowly turned around and began to walk away from her. He began to reach the shore of the beach, and it was only then that something crashed into him from behind. His eyes widened as he was pushed forward. The bangs of his hair covered his face. He didn't want to do, but it was something he needed to do. Why are you walking away from me, Ni-san? Why are you leaving me alone?" she called out to him, desperately crying. She had latched onto him and her small hands held him from behind, not allowing him to move forward even a step. He lost his cool. Turning around, he pushed her aside and watched as she crashed onto the shore of the beach. He was secretly glad, however, that the sand had cushioned her fall. Only hurt and desperation reflected itself in her lone eye as Sasuke glared at her. "Erza!" The screams of the prisoners called out to her as Sasuke looked on. They were approaching rapidly and his eyes slowly fell back onto the young girl before him. "I am not your brother," he spoke out, a certain edge to his voice. "And you?" Sasuke paused. He didn't want to say it, but it broke him as he did the deed. "You mean nothing to me." The coldness hit her and Erza's lone eye widened in surprise. That was all it took, and Sasuke spared a glance at her and then finally began to walk on the sea once more to reach the destination that he so long desired. The captives raced to her, hoping she was all right. She was locked in a trance as she watched the Avenger's back slowly fade away from her sight. "Erza! Erza!" Simon called out, kneeling next to her. He shook her, hoping to arouse her from her trance. "What's wrong? What did he do to you?" Simon asked her, begging her to answer her. "Simon. What's wrong with Erza?" Another voice. This time it was Wally. Simon looked up to him in desperation. "I don't know. She's not answering." It didn't take long before the sea of captives came up to them and started worrying about their leader's state. "You mean nothing to me. You mean nothing to me. You mean nothing to me. You mean nothing to me." The voice played out in her head, torturing her. She knew this wasn't something he would say. It burned her, hurt her, wounded her and broke her, and with each glance she took, Sasuke's form faded further away from her, ignoring everyone around her. She arose and ran. She ran into the sea, hoping she could reach him. She called out in desperation. "Ni-san. Don't leave me alone," she cried. But it fell on deaf ears as Sasuke kept walking away from her. He had heard her cry. He didn't bother with it. Looking back would only be painful for him, he consoled himself. At least he had memories of a small young girl whose smile shone brighter than the sun, but the sun slowly died out with her image, and up came Konohagakure and the blood of his clan. The prisoners struggled as they caught Erza and held her back, keeping her from drowning, and her close friends consoled her. But it wasn't enough, as she continued to thrash her way, hoping to go back to him. Sasuke was long gone now, and there wasn't anything she could do. They had brought her onto the ship and had hoped to set sail, but much to their luck, the barrier around the Tower of Heaven had faded. The sound of the barrier fading had caught them off guard as they looked back in surprise. What they saw next, however, was a bright beam of light that resonated from the tower's roof, and then, death. Sasuke was almost near the coast when he had heard the sound of the barrier dying down. His eyes widened as he looked back. Something wasn't right. He feared the worst, and it struck him when he saw a bright light emit itself from the top of the tower. He could see two boats heading out from the shore. He knew what was going to happen next. The beam of light hit the two ships, causing a raging fire to burn the surface of the sea. Before he knew what he was doing, Sasuke turned back and picked up his pace on the surface of the raging sea, hoping he wasn't too late. Erza, he thought out in sadness, and then it turned to anger as he raced to the burning ships. Regret filled his features. He shouldn't have treated her like that. It raged away inside his mind as he increased his speed. Erza didn't know what had happened, but all she could see was blackness, a fire, a scream, death. That's all the blackness brought forth to her. Everything was over now, wasn't it? She felt like she was going to die. She was drowning, her thoughts brimming with sorrow. Jelal, Simon, Wally, Miliana, Sho, I wish we could have spent more time together. And then Sasuke's image had turned up. A small smile etched itself onto her face. Even though you said you weren't my brother, Sasuke-ni-san, I wish you were. I wish we had met before. I wish I could have fun with you. I wish I was with you. And her small wish was answered. Wake up! A voice called out to her. She didn't know who it was. She coughed violently as her lone eye opened. Blurriness hit her as she saw an image in front of her of a boy. It took a while before she could identify who it was actually that was in front of her. Her lone eye widened and she immediately awoke and grabbed him. Her face buried itself into his shirt as she started crying. Ni-san. Sasuke didn't say anything. His eyes turned to the sea and then to the Tower of Heaven. They had the last laugh, much to his dismay. He didn't know how many of them died, but he knew how many of them lived. None. His eyes looked back to the small scarlet-haired girl in front of him who sobbed and cried into his chest. It was annoying, but he was able to bear it because he wanted to make up for what he had said to her. If this didn't happen, he would have followed what Itachi did, step by single step. His resolve tightened. I'm not my brother. Stop crying, Sasuke began, his calm voice reaching her ears, which prompted the girl to glance at his face. You're safe now. And with that, she began tearing up again, much to his dismay. It would seem that fate had given him an unnecessary burden. The Tower of Heaven was the last thing on his mind at the moment. So was Konoha. This moment was peaceful to him. It was a blessing to him. All that awaited him now was how was he going to take care of her? He couldn't leave her alone. The thoughts died as he looked back to Erza. A small amount of time passed and the crying had stopped. It took some time, but she cried herself to sleep. I don't blame her, Sasuke thought, and then slowly he took his Akatsuki robe and covered it over her. His eyes slowly turned to the sea and the tower in front of him, and anger swelled up inside of him. He had lost this fight. Not just that, the people he had encountered possessed strange ninjutsu that he had never seen before, blasts of light, fire make. He didn't know what to expect. Where exactly was he? And how exactly was he supposed to reach Konoha? Questions once again droned away at his mind, eating away at it. His eyes slowly fell onto Erza once more. Her peaceful sleeping form put him at ease as well, and all his questions could wait. His first priority was taking care of the little girl beside him, much to his dismay. 8 hours later. Get up, Erza groaned as a voice awoke her from her sleep. She was shaken as she sat up, still groggy and weary from the events that had transpired. Her lone eye widened to see Sasuke looking at her. Her gaze fell away, not wanting to meet the Avenger's eyes. It was to be expected. She didn't know how to talk to him after what he had told her. Sasuke's eyes gazed on her for a bit, hoping she would speak. When she didn't, he let out an audible sigh and picked up something from the campfire behind him. He placed it in front of Erza as the young girl looked on in surprise. Here, he offered. He held up a roasted fish that he had caught and cooked. It was placed on a stick. Eat this, there's more if you want any. And there was. Erza's eyes widened to see at least 5 more of the cooked delicacy near the campfire. She slowly took it and quivered as she looked to him. Thanks, Ni-san. Sasuke didn't say anything, rather looked away from her and looked to the campfire. He began eating as well. They ate in silence, much to Erza's chagrin. She wanted to talk. She wanted to ask him. When she had finished eating one of the fish, she hungered for more, but she was too shy to ask for. Sasuke glanced at her, and on seeing the empty stick, he took another from the fire and held it near her. Eat, he stated, it's going to be a long journey. She blinked. Journey? She questioned out, her mouth moving before she could think. Where are we going? Sasuke looked back at her, his coal-black eyes meeting her lone eye. Rosemary Village. What? She stood up almost immediately in surprise. Sasuke wasn't affected by her sudden anger. He knew this would happen. But, she began, Simon, Wally, Sho, Miliana, all of them are dead. And it's that tower's fault. How can I ignore that? I'll bring it down and I'll avenge them. You can't? Sasuke answered. A direct, truthful answer, and then continued. You're too weak to do anything. Weak, she whispered. That's right, if I wasn't weak then I could have saved them. I could have saved all of them. The words etched into her like a blade searing into flesh. The sudden silence indicated to Sasuke that he had cut her down. She bowed her head in shame as tears threatened to fall again. Sasuke wanted to laugh. This was the same way he was when Itachi had did what he had to do. The people who are responsible for what happened aren't someone you can take down the way you are. Sasuke continued, her words slicing her soul bit by bit. He scoffed at her. You'd just end up dying early. Then tell me, Erza whispered. Sasuke blinked and looked at her as she shouted at him. Then tell me what I have to do. I see can't just let this. I can't, I'll let them die. I don't. She whimpered. I don't want to lose anyone again. I want to protect them, so tell me what I have to do. She finished, as Sasuke remained calm, his eyes closed, and he looked to the blue sky above him. Get stronger, fairy tale. I have to go there. Erza's mind lit up at the mention of those 2 words, and those 2 words were all the answers she needed as she then looked to Sasuke again, her resolve now firm. She nodded his head at him, much to the Avenger's amusement. He looked away from her at that moment. She seated herself next to him and began to eat, as did Sasuke. See, can I still call you Ni-san? She questioned, her thoughts going back to their confrontation on the beach. Sasuke didn't spare her a glance. Do what you like, he answered. A vague answer he knew that Erza would understand, and she did. Smiling, she looked to the campfire in front of her. Ni-san? She questioned out again, and Sasuke looked to her. What is it? I want to become strong, so that I can protect you too. She beamed a smile at him, and Sasuke blinked in surprise. A smirk etched its way onto his mouth, and he brought up his right hand. With 2 fingers outstretched, he poked her on her forehead, sending her staggering back a bit. Ow! Why do you always do that, Ni-san? She questioned him, in irritation. It's getting cold, finish eating. Sasuke answered as he took another one of the cooked fish from the dying campfire. Stop changing the subject. She shouted at him, much to his dismay. He was sure one day his ears would be melted away. Short chapter, sorry. But few, and that's the end of the Tower of Heaven arc. Next up is another arc, which I will name later. Till then. Hope you enjoyed the chapter. Adios. Meeting disclaimer. I in no shape or form own the characters or settings of Naruto or Fairy Tail. Guest. I think it would be useless since Sasuke's eyes are almost gone. It'd have no use for Erza. Gravenimage. Haha, yeah, he sure will become someone important to Erza, someone she has to protect. Celis. Speed? This is just me making it up for the past year, haha, thanks for your support, man. Ko. He's slowly changing and his attitude is mellowing, but it's gonna take some more time. Yup. Anyone wants friend turkey? Anyone? Festrol. Haha, no problem. Sasuke's changing with each chapter, which is largely once again due to Erza's influence on him. You'll see it in this chapter as well. Shadowhawks. Nothing concrete yet, but yeah, that is what I'm leaning towards. He'll have someone beside him to help him on that though. 2 superhero. Author Sama. Ha. I don't think I need that much respect. Thank you for your support. Kana. I hope you keep reading, Kana. It's just beginning. Meech Mako. Erza's eye, Haven't thought about it yet. Giving a Sharingan to her isn't necessary, I think. She'll become way more OP than she already is. Crimson 11116. Still thinking about that? Shadow of Hearts she. Yes, I do read the manga and watch the anime, and have been thinking about it for a while, so maybe I'll do a return to help Naruto arc later on in the story just for kicks for his new power. I don't think he'll need it, but let's see where it goes, haha. Thank you. Chapter 8. Meeting. Erza, watch your step. Sasuke's cold concerned voice reached out to the young scarlet-haired girl. Currently they were traversing a rugged cliff in order to reach the small town that lay above it. His coal-black eyes watched as Erza struggled and crawled her way up the cliff. It was a different matter for him altogether. He had used his chakra to jump up the cliff and stood on top waiting for the young girl to reach him. All right. She stuttered. Inch by inch she climbed up the cliff as fast as she could. Her lone eye looked to Sasuke, who in turn looked down at her. She gritted her teeth. "Ni-san, just you wait, I'll definitely catch up to you." Her determination blazed as she climbed up the cliff, picking up her pace. This had startled Sasuke. "Slow down, you're going to fall. Kaya," she cried out as she lost her footing, slipping on a weak piece of rock. She began her descent down to the ground. Sasuke moved almost immediately and caught her small hand. She looked to ground below her and then to the Avenger, who slowly pulled her up with his strength. Slowly bringing her up, he placed her on a strong section of the cliff beside him and looked to her. "Thanks, Ni-san," she murmured. "We'll rest as soon as we get to the next town. Come on," he answered, seemingly ignoring her thanks. Sasuke began to climb the cliff again with Erza in tow. This time he waited as she climbed to the top before he then proceeded to shunshin right next to her, surprising her. To the young girl, she was amazed at his abilities. He could move so smoothly without a flaw in his steps. He glanced at her and then to the horizon. "We're almost there," Sasuke told her. She nodded her head with a smile as they began to walk towards the town. Sasuke's mind, however, lit up. Would people identify him as Uchiha Sasuke, the missing nin and the one who had attacked the 5 cage? If they did, it could mean trouble for Erza. He silently reasoned that since this was such a remorse location, news of him being a criminal couldn't have come this far, for even he had not heard of this area. He had studied locations intensively during his time with Orochimaru. He had not, however, heard of the current area he was in nor of the tower they had just been held as captives in. Hopefully he would be able to get some information as to where he was. "Help! Somebody help! Quiet, you wench, ah!" Erza's ears perked up at the sudden cry for help, much to Sasuke's dismay. Without a word to him, she took off in the direction of the cry, running as fast as she could. "Erza!" Sasuke called out in annoyance. "Tch!" He grunted as he too soon followed after her. Erza ran as fast as she could and reached the sound of the cry to see a woman and a man being harassed by a group of bandits. From what she had observed, the couple were most likely merchants who traveled from one town to another. Without another thought, she dashed into the fray and shouted at them. "Leave them alone." The bandits perked up at her defiant cry as they looked to her and began to laugh at her, much to her chagrin. She didn't like being mocked. The man who they had beaten down slowly raised her head to look at their supposed savior. His eyes widened as he called out to her meekly. "Child. Run away, oof. Quiet you. Can't you see the little girl is trying to play hero?" Scoffed one of the bandits. Again this time, however, the woman called out to her. Run away. Why, you'll get hurt." Erza, however, did none of that. She remained steadfast in her resolve. One of the bandits slowly moved towards her and began to mock her. "Oh, what you going to do, little hero? You gonna save them? You wanna hit me? Go on, hit me then," he mocked, bringing his face down to Erza's level, in her anger. Erza mustered up all the strength that she had and then slapped him, sending him staggering back in surprise. "You brat! That hurt," he shouted, and moved to strike her down. "I'm gonna Erza's face immediately lighted up in joy as Sasuke grabbed the hand of the bandit and twisted it, and then he kicked him to the tree adjacent to him. His face crashed right into its bark and he dropped unconscious. He looked down at her, seemingly upset with her. She caught it, but he didn't say anything, rather looked to the bandits around him. The first move they made would be their last. "You! How dare you! We'll beat you senseless! Here, eat this!" Sasuke's eyes widened as an orange circle formed in front of the bandit with letters and incantations. It was the same as when he had fought the two assailants who wanted to take Erza. He readied himself. He didn't know what to expect. "Fire make! Fireball! A moderate ball of fire erupted and moved to consume him. He dodged it easily with his superior speed. He didn't want to waste chakra, and so he zipped and zoomed across the battlefield, kicking and punching the bandits, sending them crashing into the tree barks, and in an instant, all of them were unconscious on the ground. Sasuke spared them a glance and then looked to Erza, who stood in awe of what he had done. "I'm gonna get stronger than you, San." Sasuke, however, was upset. Erza had run off without a single word to him. He looked to her in annoyance as she ran up to him. That was reckless. She stopped and looked away from him, seemingly in shame. Sorry, San. Please don't scold her. If it wasn't for her." A voice resounded, and Sasuke looked back to find a woman with apple red hair. She was wearing a purple dress with a white shawl over her shoulders neatly tied in the middle. Her bangs freely floated in front of her face. "We didn't know what would have happened to us." "Us?" Sasuke thought out. His eyes widened as she placed her hand on her stomach, a seemingly noticeable bulge. "She's pregnant." He looked to Erza once more and then back to the woman who slowly came up to him. The man behind her, Sasuke reasoned, was most probably her husband. He slowly raised himself to his feet and stood up, coming to him as well. "Thank you for saving us," he said, his voice seemingly full of gratitude. "You're thanking the wrong person," Sasuke began, his voice cold and emotionless. The couple perked up at the sudden statement and watched as his coal-black eyes directed them to the young scarlet-haired girl next to him. They chuckled. The woman slowly knelt down and smiled at Erza. "You're a real hero. Thank you for saving us. What's your name?" she questioned, her voice full of kindness. Erza blinked as she glanced at Sasuke, who looked away from her and then slowly back to the woman, who tilted her head at her in a questioning gaze. "My name is Erza Scarlet," she answered, her voice cheery. "That's a beautiful name. You'll be someone great one day. I just know it." She smiled as she stood up once more and looked to Sasuke. "And what's your name, young man?" Sasuke answered coolly. "Sasuke." She smiled at him. "That's a strong name," she exclaimed. He watched as the young woman then looked to her husband. Sasuke watched as the woman whispered something to her and then he nodded his head. "Yeah, Jasmine, I think so too." Both Sasuke and Erza watched as the man drew out a small pouch and threw it to Sasuke, who caught it effortlessly in his right hand. He blinked in surprise and looked to them. "There's about 2,000 jewels in there. Please take it as a reward," he stated. Sasuke nodded his head but stopped as he looked to him. "Jewels?" "Yeah, jewels. What? You haven't heard of money before?" the man questioned, a low chuckle as Sasuke grew surprised. "The standard currency in the elemental nations is Ryo. Just where am I?" "Are you two siblings?" the woman, now identified as Jasmine, questioned. Before Sasuke could answer, Erza beat him to it. "Yeah, he's my big brother," she answered, beaming at the young woman in front of them. "Oh really? Where are you two heading?" "Rosemary Village," Sasuke answered, straight and direct. "Do you know where it is?" "Huh, that place, if I recall, was burned down by some cult or something," the man began. Sasuke slowly looked to Erza, who had now looked away from them, sadness slowly etching into her features. He knew it pained her to remember such things, but he needed the information. "Anyway, it's beyond that mountain over there. The fastest way is climbing up there and then heading down. It's at the base of the mountain on the other side. If you're going up there, you'll need to pick up some warm clothes. It can get pretty chilly over there." So they were closer to the village than Sasuke originally thought. He looked to them once more, one more question on his mind. "This area, what's it called? I've never been here before." "Are you two lost?" Jasmine questioned, her voice full of concern. Sasuke played along. "Our parents were killed a few days ago. They had told us if anything happened that we should head to Rosemary Village, so we've been searching for it up until now," he answered. Being this outgoing wasn't in his nature at all, but it was handy for gathering information. Erza blinked at him in sudden surprise with the lies that he had made up. She would ask him about it later, for she knew that Sasuke wouldn't do anything without a reason. "I see. I'm sorry for your loss," Jasmine replied. Sasuke could tell that both of them meant it. They were good people, unlike him. "We'll take you to the next town. We needed to stop there anyway, and then we'll drop you at the mountain path to that you can climb up the mountain. There are some towns up there as well, so you can rest up if you're tired. To answer your question, this whole land, it's known as the land of Ilvan," the man explained, and then slowly turned around and walked back to his carriage. Sasuke then looked to the young soon-to-be mother before him once more. From Rosemary Village, how do we reach the Land of Fire? Sasuke questioned. Land of Fire? Jasmine questioned out in surprise. I've never heard of such a place before. Sasuke's eyes slightly widened in surprise as he grew cautious. Have you ever heard of the village hidden in the leaves? No, I've never heard of such a village before either. Honestly, this is the first time I'm hearing of both of those locations, she answered, and warning lights began to go off in Sasuke's head. Erza looked to Sasuke, who had just momentarily been shaken. Jasmine continued, however. You may find someone who may know where that village is if you head up the mountain. Now, come. She called out to them and walked ahead of them. Erza's gaze fell onto the Avenger, who didn't move. His thoughts were rapid. Where exactly was he? Slowly he shrugged it off as Erza called out to him. Ni-san. Let's go. They're calling. He shook himself out of his trance and looked to her, and slowly he walked beside her. You lied a lot. Ni-san. Erza accused. HMPH. Sasuke answered. Much to the young girl's dismay, she grew annoyed at the shallow response. Slowly they got into the back of the carriage. It was a long journey after all, and both of them were tired. They had deserved a small rest. Erza-chan. Jasmine called out. At the sudden call, both Erza and Sasuke looked to the front of the carriage in response. There's some clothes and sandals in the back. See which suits you. She smiled as Erza blinked in surprise. Sasuke looked to them. You sell clothes? He questioned. The young woman nodded her head. My husband and I are starting an apparel company called Heart Cruise. So, before she could finish, her husband jumped into the conversation. So, soon we'll have outlets all over. So I want you two to come visit any outlet you want and tell them that you know us. It'll be on the house. Sasuke looked on, and then on behalf of Erza and himself, he did something completely foreign to him. Thank you for your kindness, he answered. The woman stuttered as she began waving her hand frantically. And no, it's nothing. We can never repay you for what you did. For all we know, we could have died back. There, he nodded his head once more and slowly looked at Erza, who had a smile on her face. What? He questioned. Nothing. She smiled as she then slowly began to search the crate for something that would suit her. Ni-san really is a kind person. After searching for what seemed like hours to Sasuke, Erza had finally picked something that suited her. Her first choice was a full-body bunny suit, which Sasuke had objected to. Next, her second choice was a maid outfit, which Sasuke again had objected to. It seemed to him that the girl had no dressing sense whatsoever, and much to her charge in, Sasuke began picking out clothes for her. He had picked out a full-sleeve red shirt and a small black skirt with black sandals. It was quaint and enough for her. I like it, Ni-san. Erza beamed at him. Such a tedious errand it was, mused Sasuke. What he had picked out was nothing too fancy and nothing too plain. It was perfect for traveling. The couple had presented Erza with a small fur coat, as they knew both Sasuke and Erza would traverse through the cold mountain ahead of them. As for Sasuke, he had his Akatsuki cloak. The couple again had bought some supplies for both of them and a bag so that they could carry them. Sasuke didn't relent. He knew he would need it to take care of Erza at least until they reached the village, and surprisingly no one had identified him. It was as if no one knew of the lone Uchiha, and there were no wanted posters either. The couple finally had dropped them off at the base of the mountain and had showed them the path upwards. Both of you, please take care of yourselves, Jasmine called out. Sasuke didn't look back, but Erza did. She waved her hand at the couple. Bye Ne-san and Ojji-san. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you soon. Slowly Erza turned away from them and looked to Sasuke, who had already begun his trek ahead of her, his Akatsuki cloak fluttering in the wind. She ran after him, a smile embedded on her face. An hour had passed since their journey, and Erza had struggled. She wasn't used to the climate, and Sasuke had slowed down a considerable pace. He knew she would collapse from exhaustion, and to make matters worse, his sight was deteriorating with each step he took. He wasn't sure how long it would be before he went completely blind. From his limited sight, he could see the silhouette of a town in front of them. A small distance away, he looked to Erza. Erza, can you keep up? Sasuke questioned, now concerned at the girl's state. Erza looked to him and nodded her head. I can. Keep up, Ni-san. Impressed by the girl's resilience, Sasuke smirked and then looked forward to the town in front of them. A few minutes and they entered the town. However, both of them were met by surprise to see the town in flames and ruins. His coal-black eyes narrowed and Erza stuttered. It was like her home all over again. Flashbacks of it came back. The screams, the pain all hit her at once. What happened here? She shivered. Sasuke slowly looked to her, his eyes widened as she knelt down onto the ground. She was hyperventilating, this wasn't good. Sasuke raced to her side immediately and knelt down next to her, his eyes widened as her breathing increased and decreased and grew erratic. She's hyperventilating, TCH. He cupped her chin and looked to her. Erza, look at me, calm down. His action was cut short as a voice resounded out to him. Hey, you, get out of here, there's a monster out here. He blinked and looked to the figure in the distance. She had short dark purple hair that was kept at chin length and her clothing consisted of a tan jacket with a black collar, jeans and a red tank top. She was bleeding and one of her legs, much to Sasuke's surprise, was covered in ice, and near her 2 children of Erza's age stood next to her, both of them injured. One had raven black hair like him and the other had snow white hair. Monster? Sasuke questioned out in surprise. His answer came all too swiftly as he felt a presence behind him. He glanced back to see a large torso and 2 large arms that end in large, scaly hands, and had 2 large legs that end in feet that resemble the feet from a large bird. It also had large spikes on the back of his feet. Its hair is mane-like in shape and it flowed down to the nape of his neck. It had a pair of horns that point upwards and it had large pointed teeth as well as 2 hollow eyes. It let out a deadly roar at him, and then Sasuke's eyes widened as he watched the monster form a small ball of energy near his mouth, and then in an instant a lime-colored beam shot forth from his mouth. He picked up Erza immediately in his arms, but before he could do anything, that same voice called out to him. Watch out! The woman he saw once more called out to him and jumped at him, hoping to save both of them. Sasuke blinked as she reached them, but it was too late as the beam hit the 3 of them, causing a gigantic explosion in the area. Dust, rubble and ash flew throughout the place. No. The raven-haired boy shouted. His worries were unfounded as from the depths of the derbies arose a large purple entity. It was surrounded by a tengu-like layer of armor with jagged teeth around its hood and wore magatama earrings. It glowed a dark purple flame as it arose to meet the monster in front of it. Susanoo had been summoned once more.